Hey everybody, so it's your girl Desiree, and I am back with another topic. What I want to do is I want to start kind of shifting things a little bit on the channel and talking more about psychology, complex trauma, things of that sort, healing growth. That's something that I've always kind of been passionate about, but I just never really talked about it a lot on here per se. But I kind of want to see where that will take things. I think it's important because a lot of these topics about relationships and even the social media trends and the things that are going on, the things that I post about sometimes, because I may see something that's trending, like the Brittany Renner situation or whatever. Um, I guess people clicking, gets people kind of looking and talking. But I think a lot of those things, I'm not saying that the people involved have complex trauma, but I'm saying that for some of us who do have complex trauma, or we know people who do, but in this case, I think I want to focus on people who do struggle with it. I think that there's a lot of ways that we can kind of learn to basically understand things better, analyze things better, address things better when we kind of have a framework. And I think a lot of people just do not take the time to really learn themselves, understand themselves, why they do the things that they do. That's something that I've been doing for a while now. In my early 20s, I kind of started a holistic journey, just kind of working on myself inside and out, not just with my diet and the things that I use to wash clothes and clean dishes and oral hygiene and all these different things, right? A lot of my lifestyle just overall changed, but also doing some internal work. And there are some areas I feel like that are stagnant that could do a lot more work, could use a lot more work, I should say. But I just kind of want to kind of encourage other people to go on their own journey if they haven't already, especially if you're young. I started when I was 23. And I think that it's important to start early if you can. It's never like if you're already in your 30s or 40s or whatever. I'm not saying it's too late. Of course not. But I think that if you can start early, it's better because as you get older, you're going to deal with various different additional challenges. And it becomes a lot more, I don't know, like you get more stuck in your ways. You continue to develop more and more responsibilities, at least for a lot of people. I don't have any children. I'm not married. So, those are two responsibilities that I don't have to deal with. But then I have, other things, right? Things within myself and family and just other things. So I think that when you start early and you still have that kind of motivation, that drive, that energy to be able to address things within yourself, it becomes a little easier for you. Not easy, but a little easier. You also have not fully developed in your brain, so it's still, your brain is still malleable. Your brain can always change, your brain can always rewire. However, when you're younger, it's a little easier. So I encourage people to start these journeys earlier in life if possible, because you will not regret it. I've never heard somebody start their growth journey at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, or even 25 and say, oh, I regretted it. I've never heard that. I actually hear the opposite. Oh, I wish I would have had learned this sooner. I wish I would have started. So maybe they did hear it, but they didn't feel like it was a big deal. I've talked to sometimes younger people and I say, hey, you should consider this. Sometimes people don't always want to listen. Sometimes when we're younger, we think we know everything or we don't feel like it's a big deal because we feel like, oh, I'll just do that when I get older. No, I think it's good to start when you're young if you have the opportunity to, because not everybody gets that opportunity. And now with social media, we have access to so many different resources that we didn't have prior. So I think it's important to take advantage of that. So what is complex trauma? So it's something that's becoming more and more known about in the social media realm. It's something that I learned about maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little under 10 years ago. So I've known about it for a while. I just haven't really talked about it that much publicly. I mean, I've shared some stuff here and there on my Instagram, but As far as here, I haven't really talked a lot about trauma and psychology and all that type of stuff. And those are things that I'm really interested in: sociology, psychology, and how a lot of things connect together. So, a lot of people, they may think that's boring, but I find it rather interesting, to say the least. So, I'm going to share my screen and, oh yeah, and I think I have a Substack account, and I want to start getting back into writing. So I need to go on there and see how to use it. And I'm considering to start writing, things on there about my experience of growth and my journey of continuing to develop uh, and do the work internally. So if y'all are interested, stay tuned for that, because I really do like to write, and it's something that I really would like to get back into. I've fallen off on so many things that I used to enjoy doing, like research, writing, reading, and so forth. So I really want to get back into the things that I love, because I feel like I'm not doing the things that I actually enjoy. And that definitely affects you a lot when it comes to your mental health. So I think it's important to sometimes find a way to tap back into the things that bring us joy. And these are things that are healthy, right? It's not things that are going to cause us harm, or things that we're using to kind of like escape. These are things that we're using to kind of actually take the things that we're going through and kind of direct it into that in a healthy way. And then in turn, we can hopefully be of benefit to other people who read it, or even if you're an artist, you like to draw, you like to paint, whatever it is, right? Now other people can potentially be inspired by what you're sharing, right? So it's a win-win situation for everybody. So I'm going to share my screen, and I want to share something with you all. But before I do that, I want to just say that, to me, from what I've learned, complex trauma is, well, a lot of people have heard of PTSD. Let me just make a disclaimer. I'm not a medical professional, so I'm not saying that I am a psychologist. No, I'm obviously going to talk about some things and then share some information, and you all can also go and research these things for yourself. And even if I was a medical professional, I still wouldn't be on here trying to diagnose anybody or anything, because obviously you have to sit with a person and you have to assess them, look at their history, look at their current and what's going on with them, their family history, all of that. And there's a whole criteria behind that, right? So I'm not on here to try to say, oh, you have complex trauma or you have PTSD. No, um, this is just sharing information. So PTSD, a lot of people have heard of PTSD, and a lot of times when there's an event that people go through that's very traumatic for them, they can develop, they can basically develop like flashbacks. They can have like fear, anxiety, depression. They can have like a lot of different intense things that happen to them because of that experience. So, for example, people who go to war, sometimes when they come back home, now they have flashbacks. They cannot sleep because they're having nightmares. They're hearing sounds, right? Or not even hearing sounds, but certain sounds trigger, right? So I'm always reminded by one of my friends, like when they have July 4th and they're doing these fireworks, sometimes it can actually traumatize some people who've actually been to war. And I'm like, that's a good point, because of the loud noises. I mean, it even scares me sometimes, because you hear this big bang boom, especially here in New York City, where people are doing fireworks all summer sometimes, especially if you live in the hood, it's like it's constant. So it can actually be very scary. You can wake up out of your sleep, you jump because you hear this explosion, you don't know what's going on. So I can imagine what it's like for a person who is being triggered because they've actually been to war, or maybe they come from a country where there's been a lot of war. So now every time they hear those things, they get traumatized. So that can be a form of PTSD. If somebody has had other traumatic experiences, now certain smells trigger them, certain colors, certain names, certain memories, right? So some people, they have a hard time being able to cope and deal with life, because many different things in their lives trigger them and bring them back to that memory and that event that occurred. And it doesn't have to be like a one-day event, but it's like one experience of life that brought trauma to them. Complex trauma is kind of like when you experience that over and over again, over like a series of times, right? So now you have this is continuing to happen over and over again. And in some cases, like in my case, you experience multiple forms of trauma that's happening simultaneously throughout your childhood. Usually it starts in the childhood with complex trauma. And because it's kind of like it shapes the person's development, it shapes the person's ability to be able to form relationships, it shapes a person's ability to be able to uh, interact with people, how to process things, how to go through life. It can even affect a person's physical health because mental health, physical health, all that is connected, right? So if a person is constantly going through fear and stress and worry, that can cause certain health concerns in certain people, right? Everybody is different, but complex trauma is kind of like a series of events, right? A series of experiences. It's kind of like you have no solution to be able to stop whatever it is that's causing trauma. So a child may have grew up in a household where there's DV, and that can develop complex trauma because that DV is rarely ever going to be one incident. Now, if it is, that's great, but in many cases, it's not. So this keeps reoccurring, and no matter what the child tries to do, maybe the child tries to fawn or freeze or run or whatever they try to do, isolate, that situation doesn't go away. They may try to talk to somebody. It depends, right, on the family dynamics and the child's personality. Every child is going to react differently to different circumstances. Like, so because you can have multiple siblings and they all kind of are affected differently from that same experience because they have different personalities, different temperaments, um, right? And then also, parents don't treat their children the same way, no matter if it's a healthy family system or not. Every child is treated differently because every child is different and every parent has a different disposition to their child. So that also can create different roles. Like, so different children in the household may have different roles. Like, one may be the scapegoat, one may be the caretaker, one may be the hero, one may be the golden child, right? So now that's going to also affect how those children are going to perceive and experience that trauma. So all those things kind of play a role in complex trauma. And those things happen because this is an ongoing traumatic experience that cannot really be stopped, and the child cannot do anything about it. They feel helpless, right? So they start developing maladaptive behaviors. They start, um, like I said, there's certain roles that they take up to try to quote unquote fix the family or help the family. I feel like I took on like the caretaker role. Sometimes the golden child, but I don't know, it was a little weird because sometimes I don't feel like I was ever really the scapegoat, but I do feel like sometimes I was kind of like punished for things that was unfair because I kind of like didn't keep things secret and I kind of spoke up about things. So I'm not gonna get too much into that because I don't certain things I'm not gonna share on here because I feel like, I want to also respect the privacy of other people in my family. But my point is that for me personally, I experienced multiple forms of trauma happening simultaneously in my childhood. So, they talk about the ACE, adverse child experiences, like your ACE score, and that basically tells you if you have obviously a higher ACE score, it tells you that you've had a lot of negative experiences in your childhood that kind of later on affect you developing certain issues later on, right? So I don't remember what my ACE score is, but I'm sure that it would kind of be more than the average child because I experienced various things simultaneously. And I believe that even though I've never been diagnosed with it, because I don't think it's in the DSM as of now, I could be wrong, but we can check that. But yeah, as of now, it's like I don't think it's in a DSM, but I do believe that complex trauma is something that I developed, and it's something that I've been kind of working through. And it's helpful that I know about it because it helps me to better understand. And it hasn't been until like the last maybe a year and a half or 2 years, maybe a little, maybe a little give or take, that I've been learning more about complex trauma. And I was like, wow, I found somebody that was really helpful, and I'm gonna share their YouTube channel shortly. And I feel like he's been very, very helpful. I mean, it's two people, but him in particular, I feel like I learned so much about myself through his stuff. And sometimes I actually laugh because sometimes the stuff is actually funny to me because I'm like, wow, like now it makes sense why I acted the way I acted sometimes, especially when it comes to romantic relationships, because it's just like, why was I acting so quote unquote crazy, you know? Um, Even if I try not to be that way. So let's go into this. Let me share my screen. Okay, so complex trauma. So this website is this? I had this up before. We'll check it out afterwards. Oh yeah, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. So complex trauma. It says complex trauma describes both children's exposure to multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive and interpersonal nature, and the wide-ranging long-term effects of this exposure. These events are severe and pervasive, such as abuse or profound neglect. They usually occur early in life and can disrupt many aspects of the child's development and the formation of a sense of self. Since these events often occur with a caretaker, they interfere with a child's ability to form a secure attachment. Many aspects of a child's healthy physical and mental development rely on this primary source of safety and stability. So basically, that kind of reiterates what I just said, right? Because I wanted to kind of share what I know complex trauma to be, and then I wanted to kind of read, more formal things. And I like how they mentioned the secure attachment, the challenge of being able to develop a secure attachment or to form a secure attachment. For me, I'm a fearful avoidant attachment style, so that's kind of like it's an avoidant attachment and a anxious attachment. They're like it's like both in one. So many women are anxious. Many women who have, I shouldn't say many women who have insecure attachment styles have anxious attachment styles. And many times men have not fearful avoidant, they have avoidant attachment styles, right? So for me, I have kind of both. I think men are more likely to have fearful avoidant though. So that's why sometimes it's a little hard for me to be able to relate sometimes to certain women because avoidant attachment styles tend to be more connected with men. Obviously, like I said, I have both, but yeah, it's very interesting. So it's important to learn your attachment style and see kind of how you connect with other people and your challenges of being able to connect because that will also help you as well to be able to understand why you kind of act the way that you act in relationships. And when I say relationships, I'm not just talking about romantic, I'm talking about family, friends, um, etc. But I think romantic really shines a light on things because we tend to see a lot of ourselves when we are dating somebody. So we may not see it as much with family, but it's almost impossible to be very intimate with a romantic partner and not see things coming about yourself because of how close you become with this person, right? Especially if there's also physical intimacy. So let's click on this one here. It says effects. Let's see. It says children whose families and homes do not provide consistent safety, comfort, and protection may develop ways of coping that allow them to survive and function day to day. For instance, they may be overly sensitive to the moods of others, always watching to figure out what the adults around them are feeling and how they will behave. They may withhold their own emotions from others, never letting them see when they are afraid, sad, or angry. These kinds of learned adaptations make sense when physical and or emotional threats are ever present. As a child grows up and encounters situations and relationships that are safe, these adaptations are no longer helpful and may in fact be counterproductive and interfere with the capacity to live, love, and be loved. Complex trauma can affect children in a multitude of ways. Here are some common effects. Excuse me. So that's basically what I talk about too, maladaptive behaviors. So you develop maladaptive behaviors and you take on sometimes the roles of certain things to try to kind of like deal with the kind of household that you grow up in as a child. but it's true. Then when you start to kind of go through life as an adult, some of those same things are not always helpful anymore, and they actually can hurt you in the long run. So, for example, you may have like a thing where you grew up in a household where there was DV going on. So you basically, every time when you had fear, you would run, you would hide, right? And that's a good thing that you were doing that. You were doing that to protect yourself as a child. But the problem is now that you're an adult, every time something gets stressful or something like becomes like scary or even just conflict, right? It could be healthy conflict in relationship arguments. And when I say arguments, I don't mean yelling and cursing each other out and being very disrespectful. I'm talking about just disagreements, right? Now it's like, oh, I'm not going to talk about it. I know sometimes that's something I struggle with. I'll be like, I don't want to talk about it. Or I'll just end the conversation. I'll just be like, forget it. And sometimes, depending on like if the person, especially if it's like a dating experience, excuse me, get some water. Oh, excuse me. So, especially like if it's like a dating experience, sometimes the guy will call you. I don't know. He'll be like, no, we're going to talk about this. Or why do you always need to end the conversation? Or you don't want, oh, so now you don't want to talk about it? They'll pick up on like the fact that's your pattern. You don't want to discuss certain things. And sometimes there is a time to take a step back and breathe and not talk about stuff. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that it's always healthy just to come and run off and not talk about things, not deal with certain some conflicts have to be addressed, and you can't always run. And there's a difference between saying I need to step back, or I need a little break, or give me 15 minutes to kind of process, and then we'll talk about it. That's different versus I'm just not going to talk about it. Just leave me alone. Even if you don't say it, but you just start, silent treatment and just kind of isolating yourself. That's unhealthy, and it can actually be hurtful to the other person because now they feel like, oh, you don't feel like this is important enough to talk about. You don't feel like I'm important enough to have a conversation with and try to address this. If you care about me and you want this relationship to work, we should talk about it. The same thing with friendships. Friendships, same thing happens. People run off and, relationships end. And it's like, well, that could have been a conversation. Even if the relationship is going to end, if two people love each other and it's not something that's egregious, there should be, in my opinion, a conversation. That's how relationships are able to grow. You can't always just, oh, I'm not going to talk about it, or I'm just going to cut you off, or I'm just not even going to address you, especially when the person isn't even aware of what's going on and they're confused. They don't know what happened. To me, this is very unhealthy. So, I don't know what's going on with my throat. Excuse me. So we're not going to read this whole thing because y'all can read this. I'm going to put this in the description. But these are the different ways that complex trauma can affect children. So attachments and relationships, physical health, body and brain. Remember I talked about that. How it can also affect your physical health because mental health and physical health are connected, right? There is a connection between the body and mental health. And then there's also a gut brain connection, right? Let's actually read a little bit of this. So it says complexly traumatized youth frequently suffer from body dysregulation, meaning they over respond or under respond to sensory stimuli. For example, they may be hypersensitive to sound, smells, touch, or light, or they may suffer from anesthesia or analgesia. How do you pronounce that? Analgesia. Um, is that Anastasia? I don't think that's anesthesia. Anastasia and analgesia, in which they are unaware of pain, touch, or internal physical sensations. As a result, they may injure themselves without feeling pain, suffer from physical problems without being aware of them, or the converse. They may complain of chronic pain in various areas of the body for which no physical cause can be found. And it's funny because it's like that's what I'm currently kind of dealing with now with having stomach issues, and doctors can't find anything, and I have no red flags or major symptoms of anything. And they believe it's due to stress, right? So when your body's under a lot of stress and you're constantly in fight or flight mode, your body is going to start having reactions a lot of times. And that may not have happened for a while, but sometimes it starts to happen over time. Um, okay, so it is anesthesia. Okay. I just wanted to make sure because I'm like, what? Let me see. What does the other word mean? Analgesia. I like to sometimes check to see. Analgest. How do you pronounce this? Oh yeah, I was saying it right. Okay, analgesia. Okay, so that's type of like pain relievers. Acetaminophen, um, opioids, other drugs like ibuprofen, which is like Motrin, stuff like that. Um, those are analgesics. Let me see something. Sorry, yeah, one second. I just like to make sure that I kind of know what I'm saying. 'Cause I'm like, what does that mean? Okay. So the other ways that children can be affected is emotional responses. So difficulty managing emotions is pervasive. Um, and occurs in the presence of relationships as well. Having never learned how to calm themselves down once they are upset, many of these children become easily overwhelmed. For example, in school, they may become so frustrated that they give up on even small tasks that present a challenge. Children who have experienced early and intense traumatic events also have an increased likelihood of being fearful all the time and in many situations. They are more likely to experience depression as well, so it can affect you emotionally. Disassociation. This is a big one too. This is something that I experienced a lot as a child, and I still experience it as an adult. Disassociation is often seen in children with histories of complex trauma. When children encounter an overwhelming and terrifying experience, they may disassociate or mentally separate themselves from the experience. They may perceive themselves as detached from their bodies on the ceiling or somewhere else in the room, watching what is happening to their bodies. They may feel as if they are in a dream or some altered state that is not quite real, or as if the experience is happening to someone else. That is so true. Sometimes when I think back about experiences I've had, especially as a young adult, it feels like it happened to somebody else. And it's interesting because I've actually talked about certain traumatic experiences in therapy, whether that be things that I experienced as a child and teen and or things that I experienced as a young adult. And a lot of times when I share those experiences, sometimes the therapist tells me that it's like I'm almost talking about somebody else's story, as if it's not even my own, because of how kind of detached I am from the experience. It's weird. But then in other instances, when I'm sitting with myself and I'm by myself and I feel like I can fully be myself, sometimes certain things trigger and those things come up, and then I feel intense emotions about those things. So it's like on one hand, you could be disassociated from it, but on the other hand, you could be extremely overwhelmed and emotional about it, right? So it's very interesting. Um, so continuing, it says they may feel as if they are in a dream or some altered state that is not quite real, or as if the experience happened to someone else, or they may lose all memories or sense of experiences having happened to them, resulting in gaps in time or even gaps in their personal history. That happened to me too. As a teenager, like I had a really bad depressive experience, and there's certain parts around that my teenage years that I don't remember. At its extreme, a child may cut off or have lose touch with various aspects of the self. Yeah, like some people even develop like split personality disorders and all types of stuff because they've become so like disassociated and so detached that they like their whole personality starts to split. It's very, very sad. Although children may not be able to purposely disassociate, once they learn to dissociate as a defense mechanism, they may automatically disassociate during other stressful situations or when faced with trauma reminders. Disassociation can affect a child's ability to be fully present in activities of daily life and can significantly fracture a child's sense of time and continuity. As a result, it can cause adverse effects on learning, classroom behavior, and social interactions. It is not always evident to others that a child is disassociating, and at times it may appear as if the child is simply spacing out, daydreaming, or not paying attention. I think this is good for parents too, because some parents don't realize that their children have complex trauma. And I'm not saying, like, once again, I'm not a medical professional, so I'm not telling anybody to read these things and say, "Oh, I have complex trauma. Oh, my friend has complex trauma. Oh, my child has complex." No, I think that you still need to obviously do your research and consult a professional about these things. But these are just things to kind of like start with. If you already know that you've been through trauma in your childhood, or your children are going through trauma, and you're trying to see what you can do to address that, because I think that's what parents should do, right? They should try to address that and see ways that they can minimize that and find ways to remove their children from that environment if possible. But I think that it's good to at least start reading and learning about these things. So complex trauma also affects a child's behavior. So it says a child with with a complex trauma history can maybe easily trigger or set off and is more likely to react very intensely. The child may struggle with self-regulation, know how to calm down, and may lack impulse control or the ability to think through consequences before acting. As a result, complexly traumatized children may behave in ways that may appear unpredictable, oppositional, volatile, and extreme. A child who feels powerless or who grew up fearing an abusive authority figure may react defensively and aggressively in response to perceived blame or attack, or alternatively, may at times be over controlled, rigid, and usually compliant with adults. Right? So these are the extremes. This is something I want to talk about another time too, and how there's a lot of dichotomies. Remember, I talked about that with the disassociation. On one hand, you could be so disassociated from things, but then you can also be overwhelmed with emotions when you're triggered and you start to feel those things of what you experience, right? So same thing with behavior. On one hand, some children can become very volatile, very easily triggered, very impulsive, but then in the other times they may be very like over compliant and trying to fawn and be people pleaser. And some children are one or the other, but sometimes a child can be both, right? Or even in different parts of your life. In one instance, you could have been more of a people pleaser, and then you become a lot more defiant and overly aggressive and overly combative, or the opposite. Uh, let's see. If a child dissociates often, this will also affect behavior. Children, such a child may seem spacey, detached, distant, or out of touch with reality. Complexly traumatized children are more likely to engage in high risk behaviors such as self harm, unsafe sexual practices, and excessive risk taking, such as operating a vehicle at high speeds. They may also engage in illegal activities such as alcohol and substance use, assaulting others, stealing, running away, and or prostitution, thereby making it more likely that they will enter the juvenile justice system because they're trying to cope. They're trying to deal with the trauma that they've experienced, right? So they're going to find avenues to try to like deal with those things, and those things can offer a way of escape. They can also offer pleasure. They can also offer dopamine and endorphins and different feel good emotions and hormones that you may not be feeling because of trauma. They may also help you to suppress the bad emotions that you're feeling. And also, they may also allow you to be able to connect with others, right? So you may be looking for touch, right? So that's where the sexual activity comes in. You may be looking for validation and acceptance. You may be looking for like I said, pleasure. Also, like wanting to feel loved, wanting to feel accepted, wanting to feel like somebody understands you, right? So obviously, if you're in a romantic relationship with somebody, you're attracted to them, they're attracted to you. You know, if there are not proper boundaries in place, sex is going to happen. Like, it's just because even in a healthy relationship, sex happens, right? So, especially in a relationship where there's no like clear intention, boundaries, you come together, sex happens, and you just think, oh, this is just a part of relationships. Like, we like each other, we're attracted to each other, so we're having sex. And you're not really thinking much of it, but you don't realize sometimes that you're actually using that as a form of coping, as a form of escaping, as a form of trying to feel something good. Either you're trying to suppress the feelings that you have that make you feel bad, or you're trying to feel something. Because sometimes if you have complex trauma, you may also feel numb. That comes from like the disassociation. So you're trying to feel something, right? So this is where the self harm comes in. Some people do the cutting, they do other forms of self harm, but also promiscuity can also be a form of self harm, right? And also prostitution and other illegal things that could be doing fighting. So it doesn't have to always be when you're a teenager. It could be as an adult too. But that sometimes for some people it starts in their 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 teenage years. And like it says, it can make you more susceptible to enter the juvenile justice system, which is very unfortunate because that sometimes usually starts a whole trajectory, right? And some people unfortunately are in and out of the system because the system is not really designed to truly rehabilitate people, at least not here in the US. So we need to do a lot better with that, especially in the juvenile justice system, because that's where, like I said at the beginning, your brain is very malleable. There's a lot more that can be done. Unfortunately, there are some teens who are so far gone and they become so violent and so dangerous that they cannot be, unfortunately, let out into the quote unquote free world, because it's like, what is a free world? But the quote unquote free world, um, which is very unfortunate. And maybe we need to start addressing some of these things earlier in life when the children are even like 8, 9, 10, maybe even earlier. So, yeah, we need those resources. So another area that complex trauma affects is cognition, thinking, and learning. So some children may develop learning difficulties. It says many children who have experienced complex trauma have learning difficulties that may require support in the academic environment. The next one is self-concept and future orientation. Children learn their self-worth from the reactions of others, particularly those closest to them. Caregivers have the greatest influence on a child's sense of self-worth and value. Abuse and neglect make a child feel worthless and despondent. A child who is abused will often blame him or herself and may feel safer to blame oneself than to recognize a parent as unreliable and dangerous. Shame, guilt, low self esteem, and a poor self image are common among children with complex trauma histories. Yeah, so that's true. So this also affects everything, right? Because if your form of your sense of self has been fragmented, and it doesn't have to always be that your parents are, because it talked about that at the beginning, that complex trauma could be abuse, but it also could be neglect, right? Or both. So it doesn't have to always mean that you're like, I didn't grow up in a household where I was told like, oh, you're never gonna be nothing, you're ugly, you're worthless. Like I wasn't treated that way, thank God, because I can't even imagine that, because I was already going through so much forms of trauma. But some children were raised in households like that, unfortunately. Their parents just always just denigrating them. I didn't grow up with my parents, but your guardians, whoever was raising you, he just denigrated you. Some children grew up in a foster care system, and you do have good foster parents, foster caretakers, but there are some who can be very abusive. And unfortunately, some children experience a lot of trauma in these foster care homes. And sorry, y'all. It's like I was up early. I was up really early because yeah, I fell asleep at one point, and then I had my menstrual, and I was trying to take care of that, and then I was like, I ain't even gonna go back to sleep right now. So I'm a little tired because I was also up early yesterday morning as well, because I had to go out to a very quick appointment before work. So I'm pretty tired. So excuse me for that. Yarning into the live stream. But yeah, what was I saying? So neglect is also a factor of complex trauma as well. So it doesn't have to always be that you grew up in a home, like I was talking about with the excuse me, as a foster care household that's abusive. But sometimes you can grow up in a home that may not necessarily be abusive per se, but it's neglectful. So you may have a household where you were not really given like a lot of, like, for me personally, I grew up in a household where there wasn't a lot of affection, right? So you just get used to that. And then when you become an adult, you're just so used to not giving hugs, not getting hugs. And you're not really sentimental with people. It's just, you figure people know I love them. They know I do good things for them. They know that I'm here. Um, that's just kind of how you see things. 'Cause that's kind of how you grew up, right? But it's important for children to receive physical intimacy, right? Um, Obviously appropriately, right? Because then that goes into a form of abuse, right? Parents, guardians should never be um, inappropriate And when I say inappropriate, I don't necessarily mean that per se, but they should also respect children's physical boundaries. So, yes, children need hugs, but they should also get hugs when they want hugs. They should not be forced to take hugs, right? Because that's the other extreme. Now, children are being forced to hug people that they don't want to hug. Now, children are forced to be intimate and come on, sit next to me, put your head on my shoulder when the child doesn't want to, right? So, this is also unhealthy because that can also create trauma as well because now the child is not learning a sense of autonomy. They're not learning a sense of boundaries, or they're being made to feel like they don't have a right to boundaries because it's like you could just touch me whenever you want to, and nothing is seen as wrong because, like, I'm not touching the child in an inappropriate way. I'm not doing anything wrong. Yeah, but the child still has a right to say, no, I don't want to be hugged right now. Please stop. That hurts. Or please, that's enough. Or if you're tickling them, I don't want to be tickled anymore. Okay, well, then stop. So I think that there can be two extremes where you grow up in a household where there's just too much of that, but then also a household where there's not really much affection. And I think most people who grow up in the latter, they grow up in households where there's not enough affection. I mean, at least as far as people who grow up with complex trauma. So I think that when there's neglect and you don't receive certain things, there's not a safe space to cry. It's not a safe space to talk about trauma. Like I feel like there wasn't a safe space for me to talk about the loss of my mother, not having my father. Like it's almost like every time you would talk about these things, you would just be told, "Oh, just pray about it. Oh, there's scripture here and there. Oh, you have a heavenly Father. Oh, well, at least you have this. At least you have that." And it was very dismissive and very much okay. I hear you, but here's a scripture, or here's this, here's that. It was never really like, okay, well, let's talk about how do you really feel about that? What do you need? I was never asked, what do I need? Are you okay? It's rare that anybody ever asks me, are you okay? Once my mother passed and that was that and everything passed, the service and the funeral, the burial, whatever, it's almost like it never happened. Obviously, people would still talk about once in a while, but for the most part, it was mostly like extended family that would bring it up. But I never really ever saw my extended family. So you know, in, in your immediate family, nobody's really talking about it. And I'm not saying you have to talk about it every day. Obviously, they're grieving too, because when I lost my mom, that was my grandma who lost her daughter. That was my aunt who lost her sister, right? So other people are also losing somebody as well. My great grandmother lost her granddaughter, and my great grandmother, she died a year later, which I believe she died from a broken heart because she was so over grieved for the loss of my mother, which was also a traumatic experience to lose my mother and then lose my great grandmother a year later. And I was very close to my great grandmother. I was on her hip. So that was very traumatic. And I feel like after those two experiences, I developed a lot of rage, a lot of different emotions, right? So I think that that would have been a good time. Thankfully, I was going to therapy as a child because otherwise it would have been 10 times worse. So at least I had a space to kind of talk about some of those things. But even then, I never really felt safe to go anywhere and like cry about it or really truly talk about how I really felt. I might talk about like, oh, I miss my mom, oh, I'm sad, this and that, but never really crying, never really truly letting anybody see how it really affected me. I only really did that by myself. And that's probably why, as an adult, even though I'm a woman, I struggle with crying around people, letting people see me vulnerable, letting people see me really truly be open and express how I really feel about stuff. Like I may talk about it, I may vent about it, I may rant about it, but I rarely ever let anybody see me cry or let anybody see me express any true emotions. And I think that comes from like my childhood and just everything that I grew up around, and just not being in a home where those things were done, like what are you crying for? Like you know what I mean? Like why are you crying? So I already knew that was probably gonna be a response. So I didn't even bother, So though those things can affect a child's self-worth. And then me growing up as a very small, tiny child going to school, people talking about me, making fun of me. I was called ugly throughout my life, even into my adulthood. So all those things simultaneously affects their self-worth and your sense of self and how you see yourself, how you relate to other people. And that can make have challenges, right? Uh, okay, so here's the ace. This is what I talked about at the beginning. So, as you can see, I've been doing my research and I know some stuff about trauma because these are the things some of these things I said before I read this, right? So it says also long term health consequences. So traumatic experiences in childhood have been linked to increased medical conditions throughout the individual's lives. The adverse child experiences, the ACE study, that's what I talked about earlier, is a longitudinal study that explores the long lasting impact of childhood trauma into adulthood. So longitudinal studies is a type of study where you study something over an extended period of time. So you will follow, usually what you try to do is you try to follow like a certain cohort. It may be more than one cohort, but you basically follow a certain cohort over a certain time. So say like for example, I want to study um, a certain medication, right? And I want to study how it affects um, children and their bodies and stuff over a certain amount of time. So I might choose like 10,000 children, and or I may even just focus on like um, black children, right? And then I specifically hone in on that, and then I follow that cohort of children from the age of like, I don't know, 9, 10, and then I follow through with them until they are adults. And then we go back and we study to see what has happened to their bodies since they have been taking these medications. And you also want to usually have a control, right? To make sure that you're factoring in other things that could have contributed to these changes that may not have anything to do with the medication, right? And you may also want to have another group where you can compare to see, okay, these people didn't take the medication and this is how they grew up versus these people who did take the medication, right? So maybe these children have sickle cell, for example. Maybe these children have heart conditions, or maybe these children have depression, right? So you're studying that, and then you're going to see, okay, these children who have depression, these 10,000 children, they took these SSRIs, and then these other 10,000 children didn't. Okay, let's now study them as adults and see the effects on their depression or whatever it is that you're studying, right? And like I said, you would have your controls because you want to make sure that you control for, like I said, it could be other things. It could be diet. It could be so many other things that could contribute to the changes in those children as well outside of the medication. So you do all of that, and then you try to decipher and see, okay, over this long period of time, you're going to be able to test that. That's just basically me saying that off the top of my head. So I went to school for sociology, so I haven't looked into these things in a while, but okay, so one second, let me share my screen again. Okay, so this is the National Library of Medicine, the NIH, and it says longitudinal studies. Longitudinal studies employ continuous or repeated measures to follow particular individuals over prolonged periods of time, often years or decades. They are generally observational in nature, with quantitative and or qualitative data being collected on any combination of exposures and outcomes, without any external influence being applied. This study type is particularly useful in evaluating the relationship between risk factors and the development of disease and the outcome of treatments over different lengths of time. The outcome of treatments, right? Like I said, like a medication, for example. Similarly, because data is collected for given individuals within a predefined group, appropriate statistical testing may be employed to analyze change over time for the group as a whole or for particular individuals. So that's basically just basically talks about what I might actually want to read this. Statistical analyses. Yeah, ANOVA, all of that. You can use SPSS to do that. Okay, so let me go back and share the other page that I was originally sharing. Okay, so let's continue. I got a little shot track. So it says the Adverse Childhood Experiences ACE study is a longitudinal study that explores the long lasting impact of childhood trauma into adulthood. The ACE study includes over 17,000 participants ranging in the age of 19 to 90. Researchers gathered medical histories over time while also collecting data on the subject's childhood exposure to abuse, violence, and impaired caregivers. Um, this is a good part. This is a good point as well because, like I said, it doesn't always mean that you experience abuse. It can also be neglect. So I also grew up in a household with my grandmother who was sick and she had like a lot of different health concerns. She had a lot of different things that she was going through internally, right? I also grew up. Like, I feel like mental health is something that runs in my family. So like all those type of things, unfortunately, people who are raising you cannot always give you 100% because they're dealing with their own traumas, their own issues, right? So that can sometimes cause neglect and you may not receive some things that you need. And sometimes you may even be a caretaker, right? Trying to take care of these people and be there for them and be hyper vigilant and pay attention to them so they can be okay. So then you therefore neglect your own needs as a child. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with children being like caring of their family members, wanting to help their younger siblings or cousins, or being caring of their grandmothers or mothers or sisters or whoever they live with, fathers. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. The problem comes in when the child is kind of doing it too much in ways that like adults should be doing it, and then the child's own needs are not being taken care of in the way that they should. That's when it becomes like a problem, where the child now becomes almost like a caretaker. That's actually not good when you're trying to help out because like sometimes the adults are not able to because like I said they are going through their own trauma. So if that's not abuse because they're not doing it intentionally to you, they just cannot. They cannot do certain things for you because they're incapable of doing it, right? So that's actually a form of neglect. So when people have trauma, it's not always that their parents were intentionally trying to abuse them. They were just these evil people. Not all parents are narcissists. Not all parents are these evil people who are just intentionally trying to harm their children. Not all parents hate their children or jealous of their children. That's not always the case. Sometimes they have trauma and those their children then are neglected or they're dealt with harshly. And in so many different ways things occur because and those parents are not healthy. Those guardians are not healthy within of themselves. It's not an excuse. I'm just saying that that's different than a parent who's intentionally abusing their child because, or even worse, they're putting their child in the hands of other people to abuse them and then blaming the child for it or whatever. That's actually very different than a child who maybe had like a sickly mother, for example, who had cancer. So now that child is trying to help take care of their mother. They're trying to watch out for signs of anytime their mother's going to get sick. They're trying to feed their mother and clothe their mother. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with being caring of your mother. But when you become a caretaker and you're a child, that's when it's like, okay, that's too much, or, you know, um, your father has like extreme, mental health disorder. He has schizophrenia, for example, or something like that. And now, like, you are now in fear because he's, maybe he becomes aggressive, maybe he becomes impulsive and aggressive, or he's hearing voices, and now he's becoming aggressive or even violent. Now the child is terrified. Now the child is feeling like, even though the father may not be actually harming the child physically, but that's an unsafe environment for that child. That child doesn't feel safe. They're always on eggshells. They're always feeling scared. And even if the father isn't like aggressive, he isn't violent, but he's just not in his right mind sometimes. Okay, well, that's scary too, right? The child may not feel like the father's going to do anything to them, but their father's not himself. They don't know who this person is. They don't know why he's hearing voices. They don't know why he's like that. They don't know why he's moving in that way. He's also not able to take care of his children in that state because he's not in his right mind. So the children become neglected. Hopefully there's another parent to step in, but then that becomes a strain on that other parent because now they don't have the support of the other parent. So this becomes an unhealthy household. And it's very unfortunate because then the question is, should people who have mental health disorders not have children, right? Because if they cannot take care of their children and their children become neglected in certain ways because they have their own issues, then is that healthy for the child, right? But then that gets tricky because then it's like you're trying to say that people who have these conditions don't deserve to be in love, they don't deserve to be married, they don't deserve to have a family. But that's why I feel like doing the internal work is important, right? Because if you have these issues, you're addressing these things when you're young, you're working on yourself. And as you get older, you may not ever fully be able to get over schizophrenia or depression or bipolar disorder or whatever it is you have, but at least you have it under control. You have done the internal work, you're on medication, or whatever it is that you're doing, you're going to therapy regularly, you're in support groups, so that when you do decide to have a family, you are in a healthy space. You're not just out here winging it and just going through all these episodes and all these things, and you're not taking care of yourself, and then you're trying to raise children. This to me is very dangerous, because even if you may not physically harm your children, that's still unsafe. That's still neglectful. That still puts them in a situation where they are not in fight or flight mode, where they have to now be a caretaker, where they now are going to go to outside sources to try to find love or try to get their needs met because they're not getting it met from you. So I think that that's why doing the internal work is so important, especially if you want to have children, because it's going to affect your children if you don't do the internal work. Even healthy people who do not have these issues need to do the internal work. So if you don't have complex trauma, that doesn't mean that you are exempt from this. That you could just, oh well, this doesn't apply to me. I didn't have any trauma in my childhood, so it's whatever. No, you probably still experience some things in childhood that you need to unpack. There's probably certain types of things that you were taught that were unhealthy, because no parent is perfect, no household is perfect. So there's still things that you need to unpack and you need to analyze and address. You probably went through things in school, right? Nobody's childhood was perfect. Now, if you had a great childhood, I'm happy for you, right? Some of us did not. Now, don't get me wrong. I had great moments. I had great memories inside of my childhood. I'm not going to say it was all 100% bad. That would be a lie. But I'm saying that, like, even if you had a relatively healthy childhood, that doesn't mean you don't need to do the internal work. But I'm saying that if you did have a traumatic childhood, especially if you have complex trauma, you've had a series of traumatic experiences, doing the internal work is not even optional. It's just necessary. It's not necessary for everybody, but especially those of us who grew up in certain ways that we did. So, continuing, it says results indicated that nearly 64% of the participants experienced at least one exposure, and of those 69%, two or more incidents of childhood trauma. Results demonstrated the connection between childhood trauma exposure, high risk behavior, smoking, unprotected sex, chronic illness such as heart disease, and cancer and early death. Right? So that's actually really, I don't want to say it's scary because I don't want to scare anybody, but it just goes to show like how trauma can affect you even on a health level, because like I said, everything is connected. And if you are not dealing with certain internal things, like I said, like we talked about already, we went through that in another area where we talked about behavior. You may more likely to engage in certain behaviors that can also put you at risk. But even if you're not out here having unprotected sex, you're not being promiscuous, you're not into prostitution, you're not doing illegal stuff, you're not fighting, you're not into the criminal justice system. Okay, but it still can, they mentioned heart disease, right? They mentioned cancer. Why? Because if you are under a lot of stress and you are constantly in fight or flight mode, your body is producing too much cortisol. Cortisol is important, but if you're constantly producing it all the time, that's not healthy. That can affect your heart. That can affect your body. Your nervous system also is thrown off. Your gut, your immune system is in your gut. Most of your immune system is in your gut. So if you are having all these feelings, right? All these feelings, and you're very stressed, right? Sometimes it affects your gut. And then in turn, that affects your immune system, right? Um, so this is why, like, people who have suppressed immune systems, they tend to be more susceptible to different things like cancer, different types of illnesses, right? Everybody is exposed to illnesses all the time. We're all even though it sounds scary, but even while I'm sitting here right now, I'm being exposed to toxins that could literally take me out. Like things that are from like animals, things from the air, right? Things that I eat, like, right? My own body in itself is constantly replicating, doing things. And my body has to tell it, okay, stop replicating. You don't need to replicate anymore. Certain cells have to die. Certain cells have to be, new cells have to create, right? The body is constantly going through these different changes. So if my body is suppressed, my body may be thrown off and be like, okay, wait a minute, um hello, and now it's producing too much. I may develop autoimmune disease because now it's like my body is too inflammatory. It's attacking itself too much. It's like, wait a minute, yes, you're supposed to fight when there's an invader, but not to the point where you're now actually trying to take me out in the process of it. And like I said, you're exposed to certain things that can take you out. And if your immune system it sucks, you can actually develop things that you normally wouldn't develop because your immune system is basically suppressed. And these things can happen when you're constantly under a form of stress. This is why some women develop yeast infections when they are under a lot of stress. Why? Because that affects your immune system. It throws your whole body off. Therefore, it throws your pH off. Therefore, throws off your vagina. Right? So when people say, oh, it's always from sex, no, you can get a yeast infection even if you're celibate, even if you're absent, even if you're a virgin. So I think it's important to think about that, because sometimes, like I said, with my stomach situation, sometimes we're thinking, oh, it may be something, health related. And sometimes it is. And I think it's still important to get those things checked out and go to the doctor. But sometimes it could be stress. And I believe that sometimes some of the things I go through, like with my eczema, which flared up really, really bad like 2 years ago or so, 2.5 years ago or so, was because of stress, mostly due to overworking myself. So I'm trying to take better care of myself, because your body, for years, I went through a lot of stress, a lot of trauma going up, and my body was so resilient, and I think it still is. But I think now that I'm getting older, my body's starting to show signs of things like, okay, can you stop now? Like, you need to sit down. You're doing too much. Your body will eventually start to let you know that something is wrong. And we need to listen to those signs, because sometimes that can be a sign that you need to sit down. Otherwise, you can develop a stroke or heart attack. You can get cancer. You can get certain things. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody who has cancer is because of stress. No, obviously not. The person can be living a life that is the least stressful as they can possibly have. They can be eating healthy and all that and still develop cancer. So I'm not saying that, but I'm saying if you do live a life, especially if you live in a situation like I do, where you live in a not so good neighborhood is not even that clean, it's noisy, it's always something going on. You also are not really doing the things that you really enjoy in life. Um, you know, the pollution, all these things that you're exposed to, these devices, the radiation, all that stuff, especially living in the city, and you have stress and you have complex trauma. Okay, well, then that makes you even more likely, right, to develop health issues, because now you have so many different things now that your body has to contend with in order to stay healthy. So we want to kind of minimize the amount of stuff that our body has to deal with to keep us healthy, minimizing the stress. The things that we can control, until we're able to eventually move to a better neighborhood. Start doing things that we actually enjoy, and hopefully we can make money from it, right? That's the challenge. Moving to better environments, living maybe in closer to nature, and being able to have healthier food and things of that sort, because food, all that affects you as well. And that's another thing too. When you have complex trauma, you need to try to eat healthier if you can. One thing I want to do is get back into exercising. That's something that I fell off with as well. And people say, what do you need to exercise for? You're skinny. Well, you still need to exercise if you're skinny. And I want to gain a little weight. I've actually gained like maybe a little tiny bit of weight recently, but I want to gain a little bit more. But yes, you need to stay active. I do walk a lot. I walk a lot. I take the stairs a lot. So I am fairly active. I'm not like a couch potato, but I think that it's still important to still do some workouts, because even though you may walk and take the stairs, there's certain muscles that you're still not using. So when you lift, and stuff like that, I like to do resistance stuff and other things, right? So all those things can also help you with your mental health and your physical health. Um, and also it gives your body an edge now, right? Because your body, like I said, already has to do with the complex trauma that you're trying to heal from, the stress. You may be living, like I said, not in the best environment, but at least you're trying to eat relatively healthy. At least you're trying to work out. At least you're drinking a lot of water. At least you are staying away from alcohol, staying away from other type of drugs. At least you are trying to have the least amount of stress possible. At least you're trying to have healthier relationships. You're trying to get more and more rest, something I need to also work on. So at least now your body now has less things, right, to contend with. Um, so I think that's important. And there's also an economic impact. This is interesting because that's not something that I actually thought about. I have thought about, obviously, the sociological aspects of trauma. I mean, it affects everybody, right? Because if you're out there being reckless, it's affecting other people. Even if you say, oh, well, I'm only doing drugs or whatever, so I'm not affecting anybody else. Or I'm having sex, but I'm using protection. Okay, well, you're still engaging in sex with other people. And if you have trauma, that's still affecting other people. And also the people that love you are seeing you engaging in these type of behaviors, and that's affecting them. But even on a sociological level, If I go out here and I'm having unprotected sex and I'm having multiple children with multiple men and I don't have a way to take care of those children, well, somebody has to foot the bill. Okay, well, that's a psychological thing. That's a sociological thing, I should say. Or if I'm out here committing crimes and harming people, okay, well, that's the justice system now, right? So you may not think that it's affecting things on a grand scale, but if multiple people are doing these things, it is affecting stuff, right? So I'm not saying that that makes you a horrible person because you committed a crime and now you're in a justice system, or that makes you a horrible person because you have children that you couldn't initially take care of. People make mistakes, right? That would be like the pot calling the kettle black, right? I have my own things that I've done as well, right? So I'm not saying that that makes you a horrible person. I'm just saying that we don't always think about how our decisions affect other people as well. It's not just about you. You have family and friends around you, they get affected by it. Then the people that you are in relationships with, they affect them. Then, like I said, society as a whole, when you make certain decisions, somebody has to foot the bill of that. Somebody has to step in and help, right? There's different people that have to now engage and now address that situation. And like I said, when there's thousands and thousands of people who are doing this, now that's affecting things on a mass level. So that's why doing things on an individual level, if everybody starts doing things on an individual level, then it will start to affect things on a mass level. So it says the cumulative economic and social burden of complex trauma in childhood is extremely high. Based upon data from a variety of sources, a conservative annual cost of child abuse and neglect is an estimated $103.8 billion or $284.3 million per day in 2007 values. This number includes both direct costs, about $70.7 billion, which includes the immediate needs of maltreated children, hospitalization, mental health care, child welfare systems, and law enforcement, and also indirect costs, about $33.1 billion, which are the secondary and long-term effects of child abuse and neglect, special education, juvenile delinquency, mental health and healthcare, adult criminal justice system, and lost productivity to society. A recent study examining confirmed cases of child maltreatment in the United States found that the estimated total lifetime cost associated with child maltreatment over a 12-month period is to be found the estimated total lifetime cost associated with child maltreatment over a 12-month period to be $124 billion. In the 1,740 fatal cases of child maltreatment, the estimated cost per case was $1.3 million, including medical expenses and productivity loss. For the 479,000 non-fatal cases, the estimated average lifetime cost per victim of child maltreatment was $210,012, which includes costs related to healthcare throughout the lifespan, productivity losses, child welfare, child criminal justice, and special education. Costs for these non-fatal cases of child maltreatment are comparable to other high-cost health conditions, i.e., $846,000 for stroke victims and $181,000 to $253,000 for those with type 2 diabetes. In addition to these costs are intangible losses of pain, sorrow, and reduced quality of life to victims and their families. Such immeasurable losses may be the most significant cost of child maltreatment. That's crazy. And it's sad that they talk about like the fatal things as well, children losing their lives because some children, they grow up in these abusive households or even neglectful households, right? And they're not being fed. And like I said, it's not always on purpose. Now, you have some parents who do some horrible things to their children, even though those parents have trauma, but sometimes it's still intentional. But you have some parents, like I said, who are sickly, who have mental health issues, sometimes it's all of the above, and they are not able to care for their children properly, and their children end up losing their lives behind that because maybe lack of supervision, lack of proper food and clothing, they're not being taken to the doctor properly. Maybe the children are complaining about things, they're not being heard, and then it ends up costing the children their lives in the process. Or the children try to run away and something happens to them, right? Sometimes children run away, like girls, they've been abused or neglected, and they run away, and then they end up in prostitution, and they end up losing their lives out on the streets. I mean, it's just really, really sad. And then they're told they're fast and it's all their fault when there's really no agency, there's really no advocacy for these girls. They're still children, they're still minors, even if they're 14, 15. It's really sad, and they're blamed for these things, even though grown men are just paying and sleeping with them in prostitution. It's really disgusting, and they're the ones who are blamed for it and called fast and called 304s and all these different things, even though they're children. So it's really, really sad. So I think that it's important to talk about these things, because the hope is that as we talk about complex trauma, um basically more people, like I say, will see that they have things that they need to do some work on. They need to do some healing and some growth, go into therapy, and minimize um, the issues that they have in their lives, especially before they have children, or if you already have children, as early as possible. You make those changes and apologize to your children, and make amends for the things that you may have done, even if unintentionally, that have caused your children harm because of your own trauma and things that you haven't worked through. I think even healthy parents should do that. Child parents who don't have trauma, but especially if you do have trauma, because I'm probably almost certain that if you have trauma that you haven't worked through, you're probably harmed your children in some ways unintentionally. So I think it's important for all parents. But since we're talking about those who have complex trauma, to be aware of that, to do some self assessment, and to remedy what needs to be remedied. So it's a screening and assessment. So this is kind of just talking about how people screen for complex trauma. Then they have some resources here for mental health professionals, other professionals, guidance for family caregivers. So let's read this here at the top. This is like kind of an example. So it says Celia is a 12-year-old girl with a long history of trauma. Child Protective Services first removed her from her mother's home at the age of 3 for neglect and parental substance abuse. After 10 months, she was reunited with her mother, who married her live-in boyfriend soon afterwards. Celia remained in their care from ages 4 through 7, and then was removed again when she disclosed that she had been sexually abused by her stepfather and had witnessed domestic violence between her mother and stepfather. Following this second placement in foster care, Celia was referred for an assessment due to academic problems, severe inattention, hyperactivity, and oppositional behavior, as well as physically violent tantrums. She was diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder and bipolar disorder. Treatments addressing her behavior, including medication and therapy, have been minimally successful. Following her adoption at age 9, her unpredictable mood swings, noncompliance, and a more persistent preoccupation with sexual ideas continue to be a concern. So it says Celia's presentation is not uncommon for children who have experienced multiple traumas from an early age and in caregiving relationships in which they are supposed to feel safe. Along with typical post traumatic stress reactions, these children often display a wide range of developmental and impairments, including difficulty developing and sustaining relationships, behavioral issues, emotional problems, disassociation, learning disabilities, and even chronic health problems. Their complicated symptom presentation often leads to multiple diagnoses and potential misdiagnoses, particularly when the impact of their complex trauma histories go unrecognized. Therefore, it is essential that clinicians perform a comprehensive assessment that captures this broad range of reactions. A thorough assessment must also carefully date and track the various traumatic events so they can be linked with developmental derailments. So this is basically, we're not going to go through this because we're not assessing anybody. But I just wanted to read that because that kind of gives you a kind of like a synopsis, kind of like a story of what complex trauma could look like. As we can see, she went through being taken from her mother from a young age, at the age of 3, I think it says. Yeah, 3. So that's traumatic, right? When you're separated from your mother. Um, and she probably was already exposed to certain things because it says parental substance abuse and neglect. So that's already traumatic. Children, even if experience trauma from the time they're in their mother's womb. So you can just imagine they're already experiencing trauma when they're 3 years old, when they're 2 years old. Even if they can't fully remember everything, they're still experiencing trauma. So we should not dismiss that. And then she was reunited with her mother, but then her mother um, married her living boyfriend, who then started abusing her. Her boyfriend, her mother's boyfriend, started abusing her physically, sexually, and obviously that's trauma, right? Um, and then that created a series of other issues, right? So now she is having all these different. Oh yeah, also domestic violence, right? So that's a whole nother trauma right there. So unfortunately, she from a young age was exposed to various forms of trauma, and they're trying to figure out why she's having all these challenges. She's not doing well in school. She's very impulsive. She's aggressive. She's violent. Um, and then they diagnose her. I found it interesting when I read bipolar disorder, right? Because sometimes that happens where children are diagnosed earlier in life by things that may not always necessarily be the right diagnoses, you know. But this is interesting. It says oppositional defiant disorder. I never even knew what that even was. I never even heard of that, I should say. Let me see something. Let me share this tab. So this is John Hopkins Medicine website, johnhopkinsmedicine.org. It says oppositional defiant disorder in children, ODD. What is oppositional defiant disorder, ODD, in children? Opposition defiant disorder, ODD, is a type of behavior disorder. It's mostly diagnosed in childhood. Children with ODD show a pattern of uncooperative, defiant, and hostile behavior towards peers, parents, teachers, and other authority figures. They are more troubling to others than they are to themselves. And then what causes it? So developmental theory, learning theory. Okay, these are different theories. More common in boys than girls. They're saying that if you have mood, anxiety disorder, conduct disorder, attention deficit, you're more likely to get it. So these are some of the symptoms: having frequent temper tantrums, arguing a lot with adults, refusing to do what adults ask, always questioning rules and refusing to follow rules, doing things to annoy or upset others, including adults, blaming others for the child's own misbehaviors or mistakes, being easily annoyed by others, often having an angry attitude, speaking harshly or unkindly, seeking revenge or being vindictive. And they're saying it can be mild, moderate, or severe. So I guess that makes sense. I guess why they may have tried to diagnose her with that, but I just find that kind of interesting because I've never heard of it before. Oppositional defiant disorder, ODD. So you learn something new every day, like they say. Okay, so let's read the bottom. So this is after she has had a trauma-informed assessment. It says, fortunately, Celia was eventually assessed by a trauma-informed clinician. Her history of traumas was clearly chronicled and linked to her symptom presentation. The clinician understood that complex trauma leaves a child mistrustful of others, in need of controlling her environment. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That if she had been sexually abused by her stepfather, that's an authority figure, right? That's somebody that she's supposed to feel safe by. So some children, they either become extremely compliant, like we read earlier, to adult figures, and they can become extreme not pick me's, excuse me. Well, that can happen too, like later in life. They become extreme people pleasers, or they go to the opposite end. They become extremely defiant, right? Because they're trying to gain some form of control. And this is also where sometimes promiscuity comes in as well, right? Trying to gain a form of control, or even prostitution, gain a form of control. I control my body. I control who is inside of my body now, because I get to choose who I have sex with, and I get to choose how I can make money from it. I'm setting my prices. I'm doing that. Sometimes women can feel a form of power from that because they had their power and their autonomy has been stripped from them from a young age. So now they feel like they have control over men, and in reality, that's not really true, right? You're not really gaining control over men by having intercourse with them, and even if they're paying you, but that's sometimes what makes women feel safe, or feel like not safe, but feel powerful. And society has kind of also pushed that too, like, oh, if you're a woman and you're being free, and you're doing whatever you want to do with your body, that's freedom. But I think freedom is doing the internal work and really understanding your sense of self, and learning how valuable you really are, and knowing, I don't want to say knowing your worth, it sounds so cliche, but really doing the internal work and being, I think the more you do that, the more selective you become, because the more you realize a lot of these men don't deserve access to you. Not because, you're like this god and they're like these peasants or devils. That's not always the case, but it's just a matter of, why am I going to give myself to all these different people when I have so much to offer, and it should be somebody that really cares about me. You know what I mean? So even if I'm making money from it, it's like I don't want to get too much into that, because I don't want to talk too much about prostitution. But I just want to mention that some women go into those areas because they have been violated at a young age, and they now feel like they have a sense of control now in their lives, because they do. Now they're adults, and now they have the right to say no, and they have autonomy. Obviously, any man who tries to do something with them regardless is he's committing a crime, right? So if they're having consensual sex, then she feels like, well, I'm consenting, this is what I want to do, I'm saying yes to this. But even then, you still have to question, okay, what's the intention behind this? Where does this come from? Am I doing this because I genuinely enjoy having intercourse with a bunch of men, or I love doing it for money? Or is it because there's some deeper things? Because yes, there are women who don't have trauma and they still do that. But for the most part, if you listen to most of these women's stories, it comes from a place of trauma. So I think that's why it's so important to question why you're doing the things that you're doing, instead of listening to society that says, oh, you can just do whatever you want to do with your body as long as you use a protection. Well, that to me is very dangerous, because protection is not just using a condom. Protection is also being selective with who you're laying with, not because he may necessarily be dangerous, but because, sex is a very powerful thing. And I feel like when you're connecting yourself with different people, you need to kind of be aware of what you're connecting yourself to, and are you even compatible with this other person? Like, and if you even if you use protection, there's always a possibility of pregnancy. So this is why you have to be careful of who you lay with, because you may not necessarily want to have a child with this person. That may not be a safe person to have a child with. Y'all may not even really be on that type of level where you really genuinely love each other. So I believe that it's kind of irresponsible for people to say, oh, just have sex with whoever you want to, as long as it's consensual, as long as you use protection. When sex is such a powerful thing, and it can cause so much heartache and pain, even if it's not to you, but to your children, because you weren't intentional about how you were going about doing things. And just because you have a child doesn't mean that you're just going to change, right? So if you're living a promiscuous lifestyle, or you're out there doing certain things, sometimes women don't stop that once they have kids. So now they're still out there doing those things, and now their children could potentially be exposed to that. So that's why I feel like it's very important to do the internal work before you have kids, or as early as possible if you already have kids, because like I said, everything affects them. And even if you don't intend to hurt them, there's still ways that you can hurt them without realizing it, because you haven't done the internal work for your own trauma. Even when you're doing the work, you still cause harm to people sometimes, right? So imagine if you're not doing the work. So I think it's very unsafe, and it's very irresponsible for people to speak like that, because I'm not saying that you need to be a Debbie Downer and tell people, oh, they can't enjoy their life. Everybody has a choice to live how they want to live, but everything we do affects other people. If you think it only affects you, that's obviously a lie, because it doesn't. It affects the other person that you're intimate with. And then, like I said, you can have children, even if you don't intend to, and it can affect them. It can affect your family and friends around you. If you have people that care about you, they're seeing what you're doing. And then, like I said, if there are certain consequences that come out of that, it can also affect society as a whole. So that's why I say it's very irresponsible when people just make it seem like it's not a big deal because it doesn't affect anybody as long as you're safe. That's very irresponsible to me, because there are people who have lost their lives behind this. There are people who have been through so many things that could have been minimized and avoided if they had had the tools and the knowledge of these type of things. Or sometimes we still don't, right? Sometimes because we have so much trauma, we don't listen and we do what we want to do anyway. But at least it may minimize some things, right? because at least we have those seeds planted and we're like, you know what, even though I may be out here kind of acting a little wild when it comes to doing drugs or, self-harm, it doesn't have to always be like sex related, right? It could be many things. People go use different paths, right? Use food and gambling, right? There's so many things that people use to try to deal with trauma. But I think sex is one of the biggest ones because many people want to be in relationships with people. They want to be in love, right? So, like I said earlier, you get into relationships with people. I'm attracted to you, you're attracted to me, and you like me, I like you, and then we're getting to know each other. And then intercourse happens because that's just what happens when you get into relationships with people and there's no really no, like I said, no clear boundaries and structure. So you're just like, oh, I like you, you like me. Let's just start linking up. And then, like I said, you're attracted to each other. So clothes starts coming off, intercourse happens. And people think that's just normal. That's just what happens. It's normal to have intercourse. Yes, it is, but it's not healthy if there's no goal and plan and you're just kind of just falling into it. Like, oh, we didn't really take time to really get to know each other. We did, but we ignored red flags. We're not really compatible, or we have chemistry, but we really don't have the same morals and values. And then you just, next thing you know, you're in the bed. That's not really healthy because now you have done something that's very important, like very serious. Like I said, sex is not a small matter. And now things get complicated. Now it's like, oh, these different things that you're going through could have been minimized if you had just said, you know what, maybe this is just not for us. So maybe we need to take our time and get to know each other a little bit more. A lot of things I feel like could be minimized or even avoided altogether if we take our time to really do the work on ourselves and get to know ourselves before just jumping into bed with people. I'm just being honest. People don't like these conversations sometimes because like people don't always want to listen to that. They no, let us have fun. We want to have our orgasms and enjoy our lives. Okay. But like I said, just know that there's consequences to everything that you do, even if you don't think so. And there's consequences that affect other people as well. So we do have to be careful with all of that. So I kind of got a little sidetracked again, but I wanted to mention that because um, I think that it's important because and I realize that it's so important because you hear people, especially some of these guys on here, talk so nasty about women and the certain decisions that women make. But of course, they're never going to talk about the traumas that come behind that. Sometimes things like with Celia in the situation, she was sexually abused. They won't call out the man who did that, but they'll call out Celia and say that she's problematic because she's doing certain things. You know what I mean? So I just find that very disingenuous. It's very disgusting too. Sometimes these men are even calling out underage girls, calling them fast, blaming them for what grown men did to them. It's actually very disgusting because it's basically saying that men are not going to ever be held accountable for what they do, and that's wrong. You know what I mean? And it makes it seem like all women out here are just doing certain things just because they just want to be fast and they just want to be promiscuous, and that's just all there is to it because they just want to be promiscuous, when that's not always true. Like I said, there are exceptions. Some women just enjoy that and that's their business. That's what they choose to do. But there are many women who also, they never planned to do that. That was never their thing. They never were like, oh, when I grow up I want to be a prostitute. That's rarely ever a woman's goal. But she fell into that because of her childhood, because of certain things. And usually, not always, but usually in some cases, there was some man that tried to introduce her to that. Because I actually have, let me tell y'all a quick story. When I was growing up in projects, I actually had a grown man come to me when I was like 11 years old and ask if I wanted to make money. I kid you not. And I highly doubt he was going to have me on the corner selling drugs or whatever. I'm sure it was going to be something about selling me. And I could have easily said yes because I come from a household where we didn't have money. Like we struggled. I didn't have my father. I didn't have my mother. My mother had just died like a year before that. My great grandmother died that year. I didn't have my father around. So it would have been easy for me to be like, yeah, of course I need money. We need money. We're struggling. We need a man to step in and help us. But who knows what would have happened to me? You know what I mean? Like who knows? I highly doubt he would have took me under his wing as like a father figure and really helped and took care of me and did right by me. No, I think it would have been, yeah, he would have been a quote unquote father figure, but not in that type of way. And I could be wrong, but me trying to give people the benefit of the doubt is sometimes screws me over. But I feel like if he didn't have any good intentions, and because why would you walk up to 11-year-old girl and ask her that? You're a grown man. So I feel like those are the type of things that can happen to young girls, and they just go into that. Not because they're stupid or oh, well, she was stupid. She should have known better not to walk off with this guy or say yes to this guy, as if the grown man himself should not be held responsible for doing that in the first place. Why is he doing that in the first place? So if I walk off with him and I go and hang out with him, and then now he's trying to groom me, and then now I'm being now used to go sell my body, who's going to be who's gonna be shamed? Me. I'm gonna be shamed and call names and be told I was being fast, not the guy. Now, thankfully, I didn't grow up in a household with women who did things like that. Anytime when I would bring up something like 'cause I actually brought it up to my grandmother and she was enraged. She was like, "Oh, these men, them horrible." My grandma was Jamaican. My mother's side is Jamaican, and she just was going off something real bad because my grandma had a lot of negative views about me because she had been through a lot of stuff. But she was very enraged, let's just say the least. Because it's inappropriate, and she was just like, Lord have mercy. Like, thankfully, I did not go along with this guy and say yes because who knows what could have happened to me. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it's little things like that, and men know who to target. They see little tiny little girls, very tiny. I mean, I'm so tiny now. Imagine how small I was when I was 11. And then you grow up in the projects, like I said, you grow up in these environments where it's unhealthy, and these men are looking for a come up. They're looking for a way to make money. They know you need money. They see you ain't got no daddy, and they come in and they use it as an opportunity, and you get caught up in that. And next thing you know, you're out here selling your body or you're doing whatever you're doing, and you're getting caught up in this type of lifestyle. It's very scary. So that's why I say it's very disingenuous for these men to try to shame these young girls when they don't call the behavior of the men who are doing it. Yes, you as a girl, I shouldn't say yes, I want to make money and go for some man. But why is he doing that to an underage girl? Even if I was like 15, that would still be inappropriate for him. That's still illegal. But especially a girl who's 11, like I was very, very small. But thankfully, I was paranoid and I was scared and I was like, oh, no, no, no. I didn't even like want him to get close to me because I was started stepping back, like, no, no, no. I was like, no, I don't forgot what I said. I think I was like, no, it's okay. And he was like, all right. And then he walked away and he left me alone. And thankfully, he wasn't aggressive. Like, he wasn't aggressive. He wasn't intimidating. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get too close to me. So thankfully, he wasn't aggressive. But of course, they're not going to come on to you aggressively because then you wouldn't go. They're going to go to you in a calm manner. And then, you get to know them and then they make you feel safe. And then over time, they're going to, you'll start to see him for who he really is. And maybe he may become violent in order to control you. You don't know, right? So that you won't tell nobody, or so that you will stay in line and that you will do whatever he says, and that you will kind of like see him like almost like a father. Like, oh, he disciplines me, he beats me and he keeps me in line. I do what he says because he's like my daddy or whatever. It's actually it's very toxic. I'm not saying, like I said, I can't confirm this 100% that's what the guy was going to do. I don't know. So if I'm wrong, God forgive me, but I'm just saying that that's the only thing I can think of because I can't think of anything else. I'm not no street girl out here hustling, so it couldn't have been something else. It couldn't have been me dealing, right? So what else could it possibly be? You know what I mean? I don't think he had a job for me where he has his own business and I'm going to go in there and do little things in his store, whatever. I doubt it. I doubt that's what it was. Because sometimes you have people who give kids little jobs, real sweep and organize things or give them a little money, just to kind of because I have a little change for the summer, whatever. I highly doubt that. Like I said, I try to sometimes give people the benefit of the doubt and it's to my own demise. So I'm thankful that even as a child, I was very like timid and shy. And even then, I used to try to see the good in people. And thankfully, even though tried to see the good in everybody, I still was like, yeah, no, I'm okay. But thank you. Even though we do need money, but thank you. Um, so I wanted to share that story because that's an example right there of how a girl can get caught up in different things, especially when she's already going through trauma and she's being raised in a healthy environment. And it would be so easy to go that route because you don't really know what you're walking into. And you're thinking this guy is safe because he seems safe. Like I said, you genuinely need the money. You need the money for your family. And next thing you know, you're trapped in a situation that you can't get out of. It's actually really, really scary. So let's go back and read the beginning again because I kind of got sidetracked. So it says, fortunately, Celia was eventually assessed by a trauma-informed clinician. Her history of traumas was clearly chronicled and linked to her symptom presentation. The clinician understood that complex trauma leaves a child mistrustful of others, in need of controlling her environment, emotionally reactive or shut down, hyper-aroused, unfocused, and distracted by fear. Following the assessment, the clinician set up a meeting and shared her feelings with Celia, her adoptive parents, and her case manager. The findings were discussed in language that Celia could understand. The clinician was careful to convey the message that Celia was not to blame for her bad behaviors. Instead, the clinician framed her behaviors as typical responses of children who experienced what Celia went through. Celia felt a great relief that someone understood. Oh, well, that's a beautiful story. Um, how long have I been on here? Okay, so I don't want to be over here too long, so I'm gonna start kind of wrapping up. But let me check my notes of what else I wanted to talk about. So like basically being a late bloomer. I had did a live on my birthday. Not my birthday. I think it was like a day before my birthday about celebrating your birthday and being a late bloomer. And I didn't keep it up because I didn't really like it. But let's talk a little bit about being a late bloomer very briefly. And then I'm gonna end this live because it's kind of long. So what I talked about in that live stream, I talked about different ways that you can be a late bloomer. You can be a late bloomer on a physical level. So if you, and we're gonna focus on girls. Um, so getting a menstrual late, developing breasts, hips, all of that late. Um, some girls actually do develop some of those things, but then they still feel like they haven't blossomed into themselves. Um, but I'm talking about the girls who didn't develop, right? They didn't develop until later in life. Um, or some women like me who they never really fully blossomed, right? So I did get the chest, I did get the menstrual late, I did get that, but that never really filled out, in other areas, right? So sometimes you can still feel like a late bloomer in some ways because you're just like, okay, when are my hips gonna spread? When am I going to look like get that grown woman weight or whatever the case may be? And I'm not saying about being thick. I'm just talking about gaining weight in general. Sometimes it can feel that way. And then when you're a black woman, you're ashamed for that. Oh, you're just skin and bones. You're not shaped like a real woman, XYZ. So that can make people feel like a late bloomer. There's also the mental aspect. So when you grow up with complex trauma, for example, you tend to have to grow up fast in certain ways because of the traumas that you experience. And in a way that's great and in a way that's necessary in order for you to survive. And that's why some people actually become old souls because they kind of had to contend with things very, very early, like kind of like I did. But then it can also create a form of arrested development in other areas because now there's other areas of your life that's not being developed in ways that they should be because of the neglect in the household, because of you having to focus so much on other things. So now when you become an adult, there's certain areas that are very stunted. And usually they're like emotional things, like mental emotional things. That's like the way you relate to people, being social, being able to navigate the workforce, etc. And I was also raised with my grandma and my great grandmother. So I feel like that also kind of made me a late bloomer in some ways too, because even though I'm grateful for some of the things that I learned, I feel like it's very unique when you're raised that way because you get access to like the minds of older women, which I think is valuable. But I think that sometimes it also made me kind of sheltered and it also made me kind of out of touch with certain things with other kids who may have been raised by their mother and their father. Um, yeah. So I never really felt like I could relate to a lot of the other kids because I'm just like, I don't care about that. Like, I just want to talk about like psychological things and deep stuff and our futures and society. Like, I was like a child and a teenager wanting to talk about societal issues and things like that because that's just how I kind of thought. I thought it was interesting. I wasn't really into small talk. Like me and my childhood friend, we would be on the phone talking about like societal stuff when we were like teenagers. Like we were just like that. We were old souls. Um, so there's also social aspects of being a late bloomer, like I mentioned. Sometimes with being sheltered or growing up too fast, you don't get to address some of those other areas of your personalities, other areas of your um, just your overall makeup as a person. So if you did not have like a typical teenage experience with like going out with friends to the movies. And like I mentioned in the live that I didn't keep up, sometimes, that might not be as much of the case now because things have gotten so expensive. So teenagers sometimes are not able to really do as much as they used to do back in the day. Because now it's like the movies are so expensive. Like you can't even go to the movie. Even as an adult, I don't even go to the movie. I'm not spending almost $20 when I could just watch it at home. I'm sorry, I'm just not. People say that's cheap. Well, that stuff adds up. I could be spending that $20 on groceries and other things that I want to do. And I'm not really a big theater goer anyway as an adult for various reasons. But yeah, it's not even like a cheap date anymore. Like I remember my godmother was saying, like, oh, they used to be like a cheap date, go to the movies and then you go out to eat and like a diner or something. Now that's expensive. So these teenagers can't even really date the way they used to. So, but if you didn't have the experience being able to just have friends going out, dating when you're a teenager, I'm not talking about having intercourse, I'm talking about just dating. You learn a lot about yourself. You learn boundaries. You learn about boys from a young age. You learn about their nature, how they think, how they move. You learn about yourself, your weaknesses, your strengths, and what you like, what you don't like. And so now when you become an adult, you're not like starting from scratch, like you kind of have a framework. Obviously, it takes until you're like probably like late 20s to your 30s to really start coming to see yourself as a woman. But and sometimes they say not even until your 40s, right? But I think that at least if you're not so sheltered, you're not so out of touch, and you don't become also as much of a target to guys who are looking for an easy lick. You know what I mean? Oh yeah, and also if you're raised in the church, sometimes that can also make you kind of like a late bloomer as well because you are told you can't do this, you can't do that. And there's nothing wrong with some of the things that you're taught because I was raised in a religious home. So I think some of the things that I was taught were really great and I still believe in some of the things. But I think sometimes the way that it's taught sometimes isn't healthy. Sometimes um it lacks context, it lacks transparency, it lacks just the ability for young people to kind of understand why they're saying some of the things they're saying. um it lacks an ability to be a safe space for them to share and say, well, this is the kind of feelings that I feel and I'm going through. What do I do with that? Or this is a mistake that I've already made. How do I deal with that without being shamed, without being ostracized? So I think that especially for girls, when they are feeling these type of feelings, like for example, you're 16 or you're 15 and you're into boys or whatever, and you want to have like relationships with guys, right? And you're told, oh, don't have sexual activity because that's a sin. You're going to hell unless you're married. Okay, well, that's not really helping you understand how to go about dating because, okay, at some point you have to meet guys and then eventually you'll meet the guy that maybe is going to be your husband. Maybe, maybe not, right? Everybody's not going to get married. My point is like, what happens before that? So now you're meeting guys and they're like trying to like have sex with you. Okay, well, you weren't taught boundaries. Okay, well, you weren't taught self autonomy. Okay, well, you weren't taught about flirting, and you weren't taught about like certain things that guys may say and do that may mean this or may mean that. So you really don't have any framework of what's going on. You're literally just winging it. And if you have a complex trauma, that's a nightmare because now you're going into situations not knowing what's really going on. And yeah, maybe you were taught, take your time, respect yourself. Okay, what does that even mean? That's, like I said, it doesn't have any context to it. It doesn't have any practicality to it. And then, like I said, you also don't even have a safe space to go and say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm experiencing. What do I do about that? What do I do about this? What does this mean when a guy says this? You don't have that space. And you're really just going to your peers. So now you're going to your friends and saying, what does this mean? And your friends are telling you. And some of your friends may be a little more knowledgeable than you because they may have grown up in a healthier household than you, or they may have more experience than you, but they're still teenagers just like you. They don't have the life experience and the wisdom that your parents would have, or that they should have at least, or your grandparents, which is why I think it's good to have both, you know. Because you get a lot of wisdom there. And even if you may not always agree with what's being said, but like I said earlier, at least a seed is being planted. But if you don't even know and you're just being told, oh, keep your legs closed, don't move fast, oh, these guys are just dogs, they're just going to try to get access to you, that's all they want, that's all they want. Well, that's not really helping anything, especially when you still want to be in a relationship with guys. So, and then if you go ahead and you have intercourse with a guy and you get pregnant, now you're shamed. You're told, oh, you had a baby outside wedlock, you sinned. The guy is not shamed, by the way. It's only you, which once again is very interesting to me. Um, but and I'm not saying that he should be shamed or you should be shamed. I'm just saying it's interesting how you're shamed and not him. That's the part that I find kind of interesting. I don't think neither one of them should be publicly shamed. I think they should be obviously told about their behavior, because I think certain behaviors come with consequences, and we don't need to pacify that, especially for teenagers. Now they have a child. Okay, that's a major responsibility. That's something that should have not happened. So that needs to be talked about. It needs to be addressed. But that doesn't mean that you need to publicly shame people and make them feel horrible about things, especially when some of these older folks have done some of these same things. And maybe if they had pulled them aside and actually been more involved in their dating process, maybe this would have been minimized, right? Maybe they wouldn't have been sneaking off somewhere having intercourse unprotected and now trying to also hide the fact that she's pregnant. I think that there's a lot of context, like I said, and a lot of safe spaces that are lacking, so that younger people can go there and learn what they need to learn, and also share what needs to be shared to help mitigate some of these consequences that could have been avoided or minimized. Of course, young people are going to do what they want to do when they're in love. They don't want to listen, like I said, but at least you plant the seed. At least they know there's a safe space to go to. At least they know that they don't have to be off somewhere hiding, which is to me also leads to a lot of unsafe behaviors. When you're hiding, when you're doing things under the wrap, when you, oh, nobody understands me, and now you're going over here trying to fix things with this relationship. Kind of like we talked about earlier, how sometimes you can use relationship as a way of escape, as a way to try to deal with trauma. Well, that's unhealthy, and at least unhealthy behaviors, which then leads to bad consequences potentially. So I think that's why these things need to be talked about in the church as well. And when you are raised in a church and you're kind of sheltered, you can be kind of like a late bloomer, and that can cost you in the end if you're not careful. Either one extreme or the other. Either you end up out here making a lot of poor decisions, and that's not healthy, even if it is with one person, but marrying the wrong person, end up in all type of crazy situations with this one person you're with, or being promiscuous, being multiple people, or the other extreme where you're just not able to have relationships with people at all, even though that may be the path for you to have a relationship, because you're so fearful and you're so out of touch, or you're so awkward that you can't even like, oh, you have so much anxiety that you can't even like actually date and get to know people because you haven't developed those skills. For guys, it's really hard because they're doing most of the approaching. You've never learned how to talk to girls. You never learned how to not be corny and be comfortable with yourself, and so you actually repulse girls and you turn them off. You don't know why they're not interested in you. You don't learn hygiene. You don't learn grooming. You don't learn certain things that are important. Like, people think that grooming and physical appearance is only important to guys. No, girls see that too. They see how a guy's hair looks, his facial hair, how he smells, how he dresses. I'm not saying he got to be looking like Fabio. He got to be looking like Picasso. He has to be, this godlike statue looking guy who is just perfect in all areas. Of course not. Even though guys who look like that are not perfect, they have their issues too. But my point is, like, some boys, they also were sheltered and late bloomers, and they were not taught these things, and then they go out and they try to date, and they're awkward, and they don't know why girls are not interested. Oh, they're just not interested in me because I'm not attractive. Well, there are guys who are not that attractive, but because they know how to talk to women. They're confident. They're not corny. They know how to move out here. They still get women. You know what I mean? They still know how to go out here and be successful and make money. They still know how to go out here and do what they need to do as a guy, and be and make something of their lives. Meanwhile, some of the guys who have complex trauma, I say some, not all, some of them, they become stunted and they can't find work, or they can't keep a job, or they're having all these different issues because they have all these different traumas that they've experienced that are hindering them from being able to go on and do the things that they need to do as a young man, to be able to and it may start in their teenagers, but as a young man, to be able to then attract a woman that he can then have a family with, if that's what he so chooses to have. So it's not always that, oh, you just don't look good, but a lot of times they're not, unfortunately, a lot of guys are also not doing the internal work. They're not going to therapy. They're not doing support groups. So they're not even aware of their issues, and they don't see why they're not getting any results that they want, because they're not, like I said, they're not sitting with themselves and doing the internal work. They just think that it's because they don't have money and because they're ugly that's why girls are not talking to them, when that may not even be the case. Because, like I said, there's guys out here who may not even be that attractive, and they ain't rolling in no cash, and they're still getting access to women. How was that? So I'm not saying looks don't matter, because they do. But I'm saying, like, sometimes when we're late bloomers, we don't really always see ourselves. And then if you have complex trauma, that makes it even worse. So you're not always seeing yourselves the way you really, really are being perceived by other people. And you're not knowing why you're getting the results that you are getting. And I think that it's important to learn about yourself and be honest with yourself, even if it's hard to accept certain things. 'Cause that's part two. It's very hard to have to accept that you went through a traumatic childhood and you had to suffer like that, in ways that are unfair. And now you have issues in your adulthood because of that. It's very hurtful. It's just a lot of anger sometimes, resentment, bitterness that comes from that. So I get it. And I get why people don't want to deal with that. We're gonna talk about that in like another video, but it's important because then you get to kind of learn why you're getting the results that you're getting instead of just always looking at other people. Yes, other people have their ways. It's not to say that other people don't do things that are wrong, but I'm saying like if I'm always getting into situations with men where it's like every single time I try to have a conversation with a guy, he just walks off awkwardly. Okay, well, maybe I'm just not learning how to communicate. And that's okay. That doesn't mean it makes me a horrible person, but I need to learn why that is. Now, thankfully, I had never really had that issue too much. Now, I had other issues with communicating with guys that I'm not going to get into here, but I just mentioned the guys part, the framework, because sometimes I'll see guys on here talking about, oh, they don't get no attention from women. The women always going about the Pookie and Ray Rays, but they never talk about the things that they may be doing that may be repulsing women. Some of these quote unquote good guys, you hear them talk and they say nasty things about women. They call women, oh, these women are three or fours, and that's what they get. That's what they deserve. They laugh at women's demise. They think it's funny. They think that women deserve what they get. They almost like they have like almost like a sense of like glee to see women, especially women that are beautiful, that they want to have access to that they can't. They almost like they have a sense of glee to see those women harmed, or see those women end up hurt, right? Oh yeah, she's so pretty and she wouldn't give me access to a guy like me. She have access like that to a Pookie Ray Ray, and then he done, got over on her and got her pregnant and left her as a single baby mama. That's what she gets, and they laugh and think it's funny. And now she wants to come talk to me. It's just like, why are you so happy about that? Like, it's interesting. And sometimes the women that they're talking about aren't even women that they even know personally. Sometimes they're celebrities or whatever. Like, for example, like the Brittany Renner situation. It's like, why are you so happy that she's in the situation she's in? You don't even know her personally. So that just goes to show that there's like a deeper thing there, because why are you so enraged or in glee or whatever you're feeling about somebody that you don't even know? Like that's a deeper thing there. You know what I mean? That's something that's triggering something else that you have probably experienced in your life. So also, as far as being a late bloomer, there's financial, right? So taking a long time to get a job that's secure, being able to make enough money to be able to have your own place, your own car, things that you need. So sometimes people with complex trauma, they can struggle with that, because complex trauma affects all areas of your life, including your ability to be able to make money. And if you don't basically address that, sometimes it basically affects your ability to uh earn more and become more and more successful. I'm not saying you have to be a CEO. I personally don't want to be a supervisor or a CEO or anything. Some people do. But my point is that, you do want to get to a point where you're making decent money, to where you can have a living wage, where you can actually save money but still pay bills and be able to invest something, and have something that's going into retirement for your future, especially as a woman. So if you're not able to do that, you've been struggling for so long. Sometimes, yes, the economy, being able to find a job, there's a lot of stuff that's going on out here. But I think that even before this whole situation, you've been struggling for years of your life. Well, sometimes that can be also linked, if you have complex trauma, that can also be affecting that area of your life as well. And you could feel behind. You see other people being able to buy a house and buy a car. And like I said, the economy is also different right now. So even people who may not have complex trauma, they may not even be late bloomers, they're struggling as well. So I'm not saying that because you have not been able to get a big girl job, it's because of your complex trauma. It may also be because of the economy. Because like I said, we're currently in a certain, realm right now that's a little tricky. But that's why I say, even before now, if you were still struggling, you've always struggled with this, I think that's something to kind of take into consideration. And I was saying, like, in that live stream before my birthday, that sometimes this is why birthdays can be bittersweet, because every time you get older, you start to feel like, dang, I'm so behind, and I keep getting older, and I don't feel like I don't feel like I'm really am where I want to be. I'm 40 years old. I'm 35 years old. I'm 25 years old. I'm 30 years old. 28, whatever it is that whatever age that you are becoming, or that you have just become recently, you feel like, you're happy in one sense because you're happy that you're alive, especially when you've been through so much stuff and you overcome so much traumas and you're still here, you're still alive to tell your story or to just be here. That's a miracle, because unfortunately, like we read, some people, they don't make it. But at the same time, you feel discouraged because you feel like, well, what's going on with my life? What am I going to do in my life? I feel like I'm not able to make any traction because of depression, because of bipolar disorder, because of all these different disorders that I have. Because some people, not all, but there's a high chance that when you go through these complex trauma issues, you can develop a mental health disorder, right? So I think that is just so much, right? And then you may not have like a strong family system, even if you have family that quote unquote love you, but they may have a lot of issues. So you're not always able to basically really thrive the way you want to thrive, because you have to unpack so much stuff and go through so much healing and go through so much this and so much that. It's a lot. And many times your family also has complex trauma. So it's just, so you're surrounded by it even while you're trying to heal. So I think that it's very challenging to celebrate birthdays a lot of times because you feel like, oh, I'm not where I want to be. And that can be depressing. That can make people feel really, really bad. So that's why I say like birthdays can be bittersweet. Now, for my birthday, it was the 22nd of July, and I went out for my birthday. Actually, it was kind of sad on my birthday, but thankfully, I also wasn't feeling the best as well because I had went to work that Monday the week, and then I started feeling kind of sick. I think from being overstimulated, and then I was off Tuesday, and then Wednesday was my birthday. And then I went out to eat that night at a vegan restaurant, which was nice. I had a cake. I was a little disappointed on the size because I thought it was going to be bigger, especially being that I spent $10 more than I did last year. But I guess, like my God was said, inflation. But the cake was beautiful and it was good. And yeah, I basically feel like I would have liked to have done more, but I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I at least did something because technically I really didn't feel like going outside. I really didn't feel like doing anything because as it got close to my birthday, I started kind of feeling discouraged. And, just other things, not having my parents there to celebrate my birthday with me and stuff like that. It was just like a lot. So thankfully, I still was like, you know what, let me just still try to enjoy my birthday. So yeah, and at least I had that rest of that week off, and I wasn't feeling the best on and off that week. And that kind of sucked. But I still got to have time away from work and kind of get my mind right because, like I said, I felt like I was kind of overstimulated and I wasn't really feeling the best. So yeah. Um so that's basically all I want to say. I'm going to start wrapping up. If there's anything else that I want to talk about. Let me see something. See. It's crazy. It's already almost 9 o'clock. It's crazy how time goes by so fast. Okay, so let's read this and then we're going to head off. That's one thing I like about Reddit because it's anonymous, right? So we don't really know who we are who's talking. I've never read this before, so it's my first time reading this, but I can already tell that this is kind of related to what I've been saying. So it says, I am currently 33 years old and I have achieved a lot of excuse me, let me start over. Sorry. I am currently 33 years old and have achieved a lot of life milestones later than everyone else. Let me make sure this is on the right screen. Okay. I have also realized through therapy that I have developmental trauma, which is similar to CPTSD, but it formed solely during childhood as a result of significant attachment injuries and adverse experiences. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and I'm slowly starting to realize that maybe the reason why a lot of my peers in my age group seem to have stable adult lives is because they did not go through as much Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. Because they did not go through as much trauma as I did. Even people I know who have rough relationships with their parents and insecure attachment styles have more of a well-adjusted adult life than I do, as maybe they haven't gone through the same level of emotional abuse or stupid family decisions that I have. I have also been reading a lot of posts on here from people who have reached their milestones late thanks to trauma, and it's not just a CPTSD thing. CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, by the way. It's also a thing with ADHD, autism, OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, or any other mental health condition, maybe because of the underlying trauma. I saw a post on Threads recently that said that late bloomers are often the result of dysfunctional families that didn't know how to support them in meeting milestones on time. And this definitely applies to me. A huge part of the family dysfunction I faced was me not being allowed to make a lot of my own decisions and being put down and criticized a lot. Okay. So it's very, very interesting. So this person is saying that they have something similar to complex trauma, but they may not necessarily have complex trauma. But let's just see what people are saying. Somebody says, I still definitely feel like I'm in my teens despite being 40. Says, let's response here. I'm finally starting to feel that I'm in my mid late 20s and I'm almost 44. This absolutely checks. ETA, after years of intense trauma healing, that is. They said, what have you done as work? They didn't respond. Somebody says, I remember thinking that I was unable to grow up since my 20s or at the latest. I'm over 60 now. I think that was the PTSD. Somebody says, I'm still blooming at almost 44, and it's obviously related, in my opinion. IMO. We pretty much have to repair ourselves and learn or relearn all the things we didn't learn in a negative way as children. It's a struggle. But there's always more time as long as we're still breathing. You've got this. Somebody said, I still haven't bloomed. Me either. Says 43 here, and I think it probably isn't just a result of trauma, but I think that it is something you find in the community. For myself, I didn't really know a ton about myself until I processed my trauma at 42 years old. And then I realized I was autistic, diagnosed, and queer, and non binary. And while I do use the term late bloomer or later in life, that really only means so much. Developmental milestones are just one standard, and it's as useless or useful as it is. Okay, that's a little something different because we're not talking about autism, but I just thought that was kind of interesting. Let's see. Like I said, I've never read this thread, so it's my first time. I'm not going to read everything. I just kind of wanted to read some of these responses from people about being a late bloomer and CPTSD, complex trauma. Somebody says, yep, it wasn't until my late 20s that I felt like a teenager, and boy, did my mom get angry, say, now you are rebelling after I raised you right. That kind of makes me think of my life because I didn't rebel as a teenager. I rebelled as a young adult. Because, like I said, I mean, I said it in my other life, I didn't say, but I didn't go through a regular teenage experience. So, and I'm not saying all teenagers rebel. I'm just saying for me, that's what I did because I guess I was trying to deal with certain things, right? I didn't grow up with my mother, so this is a different situation, but I just thought this is kind of interesting. Okay. I started to learn that I could do some slight stuff in my life. Now in my 30s, I feel like, man, I realize I missed out on so much in life and I feel terrible. Younger people understand me better than I understand myself sometimes. And I feel kind of bad. Like I'm older, I should be better at this. I just don't know how to be very well. I finally feel like, okay, I can properly do stuff now I should have done 10 years ago. And I feel terrible. It took me so long to get where I am, but what can I do? Somebody said, "Hey, don't blame yourself. You were very tightly controlled. Controlling parents can really hold people back. A lot of times they have to pass first before you can have a life." That's unfortunate. And like I said, that's not always intentional. I believe that I was very much sheltered because I was a child who was going through a lot of trauma. So I think my grandmother and so forth tried to really shelter me because that's the best you can do. She didn't have my grandfather there or a man in the house to really kind of set a little more discipline and order in the home. So she's trying to do the best that she can. We're growing up in the projects, and she wants the best for me. She wants me to be safe. So I think that yes, I missed out on a lot of things, but I also try to hold space and hold grace because I know that the women in my life were trying to do the best that they could at the same time. It does make me angry sometimes because I feel like it's not my fault that I didn't receive certain things that I needed, but at the same time, at least I had what I had because I could have been in foster care. It could have been 10 times worse. My grandma didn't have to raise me. My grandmother didn't have to take me in as a teenager. So I try to be grateful for what I did have, but I still do acknowledge that there were a lot of things that I didn't receive, not because I was being intentionally abused, but because there was neglect, because the women in my life, they weren't able to give me everything that they wanted to, or that they might weren't even always aware of what I needed because they they were basically doing things from capacity, from whatever they were able to give. um me and my grandmother, how much can she possibly do? She has to work. She's working a lot of hours. So I'm not able to receive certain things because I don't have both parents. You know what I mean? So it's like you kind of have to understand that. She also didn't I didn't grow up with her as a child. So I'm coming in here as a older teen. So there's a lot of trauma already that has occurred. So it's very challenging, it's very difficult. So there's certain things that you just kind of have to take into consideration when you think about how you were raised. Not to excuse certain things, but to be understanding of that. Especially when you have people that were trying to do the best that they could, even though it may not have been the best that probably should have been done, but it is what it is. And now you're an adult, so now you have to kind of unpack that and work through that. So okay, another one says, I've always referred to myself as having failure to launch, late, doing anything early 20s when I started driving. I couldn't leave home because I didn't feel prepared. I keep reminding myself now that I'm in my 50s, everyone is gonna want to kick it with this old broad because I'll be having fun doing things I was too afraid of years ago from not having any confidence. That's a fun way of seeing it. It's like, okay, now I'm 50, I'm in my 50s, and anybody's gonna want to hang out with me because now I'm gonna be extra fun because I didn't get to have as much of a childhood and a young adult years as other people. So that's interesting. And it gives me some sense of peace reading this because a lot of these people are also older than me. So it's like it just goes to show that even when you're in your 40s and 50s, remember I was saying earlier that sometimes you don't even come into your womanhood, even sometimes they say in your 40s, because there's just so much to learn. Even for women who grew up healthy in healthy ways. So imagine for those of us who grew up with complex trauma, it's gonna take time. This person says, I'm 41, I feel like I'm 15. I just realized I'm a lesbian a few months ago and I'm currently experiencing my first real crush. Wow. Somebody said, I call it Peter Pan syndrome. I am a lost boy. Literally, I am 39, but I feel the same as I did as a teen. I am trans and queer, and though some part of me has always known, I didn't realize it until I was in my 30s. I didn't come out until my 30s. I was never allowed to explore my own values and identity freely, and I didn't have the safety to really understand myself. My time and energy was being spent being vigilant from bullies at school and abusers at home. I was criticized and made fun of, so I definitely am a late bloomer, partly due to my trauma. Okay, this other person, I completely understand how you feel because I'm going through a similar experience. Being a late bloomer or feeling behind your peers is very common among people who have suffered deep psychological trauma in childhood or at different stages of their lives. Trauma affects how we grow emotionally and socially, and it can make it difficult to build a stable life as quickly as others. What I want to also add is that a lot of times trauma also stunts you because when you get triggered, a lot of times it brings you back to that age that you were when you experienced trauma. And that's where the arrested development sometimes comes from as well. So this is why sometimes you'll see people acting like children, like they'll throw like a temper tantrum. Like it could be a grown man, big 6 foot, 200-pound man throwing a temper tantrum. He's acting out sometimes as if he would if he was 9 years old, if he was, 12 years old, because he hasn't unpacked that trauma. And the body is reacting as well. It's also a physiological thing. It's a psychological thing, right? It's everything is connected. It's even a spiritual thing, in my opinion as well. So I think that sometimes when we feel like children and we feel like we haven't grown up, it's obviously that's different than having an inner child. But I think that's because we also are kind of sometimes stuck back into that traumatic age that we were when we experienced that trauma. So let's continue what they say. So it says, but we must remember that everyone has their own path and the time each person needs is different. The challenges and difficulties you face have shaped your inner strength and made you stronger in the end. Being late in reaching some milestone doesn't mean that you are less successful. It just means your journey was harder, and that deserves appreciation and respect. Wow, this is making me kind of emotional. Okay, it says, don't compare yourself to others and try to focus on your own progress, no matter how small. Every step you take towards healing and growth is a great achievement on its own. You are not alone, and there are people who understand you and share. Wow. Somebody says, I can relate. I am 26 with ADHD, complex trauma with CPTSD. I feel like I'm finally able to start to grasp some of my goals. They said, being alive is an accomplishment. Being alive is an achievement if you have CPTSD. Wow. That's a good point. Like I said earlier, some people didn't make it, unfortunately. So that's true. Even being alive is an achievement in of itself. So I said, yes, I spent so much time healing and worrying about my mental health, dodging triggers. I missed out on exploration part of my early 20s. Lessons are learned, and I am more capable of protecting myself in the future, but I do wish I was back to being 2 years younger so I could have a do over. Yeah. I felt I spent a lot of my 20s doing that as well. A lot of healing and then also a lot of regret because of making poor decisions because of trauma. So now you got to heal from your childhood and those decisions in your 20s too. It's just like, oh, come on, it's too much. Thankfully, I did go to college in my 20s. I did start traveling on my own in my 20s. I did a lot of things in my 20s. I got my license, which I need to get back on the road. Like, I did do a lot of things that I wanted to do, but I feel like it was still full of so much trauma and pain because I was like trying to unpack so much stuff. It was still so much pain and depression and sorrow, and that I didn't feel like I got to really able to enjoy my youth the way I wanted to. And that sometimes makes you angry, makes you feel like you've been robbed of certain things. But it is what it is. There's nothing you can do about that. You can't go back. And that's something that I'm trying to learn. Somebody says relatable post. I a lot of things 2 to 5 years later after my peers. It just took me longer. But I think of it this way. Moms love to brag that their child walked early, but most kids walk eventually. As adults, doesn't matter who walked before a year old and who walked at 14 months. Nope. I read somewhere I am on track. That doesn't mean I caught up. I was never behind. I am where I'm supposed to be right now. Wow. Somebody says, yes, I feel like that. I feel like I am too. I still feel like at least 10 years younger than I actually am. I think it's due to a mix of complex trauma, CPTSD, autism, ADHD. I'm in my 30s now and I finally getting to know myself, but very much feel like I could be 21 and freshly graduated again. So much of my early adulthood feels like another person or barely lived. I met some milestones in my 20s, like a first relationship and moving in together, getting a house together due to an ex partner or societal pressures, but they sometimes didn't really feel like mine because of that. So now everything is feeling sort of new and first time now that I'm working on things alone, like travel, post grad, etc. Some, like having children and getting married, might never happen for me, I suspect, now that everything is so out of the woodwork. I feel like a late bloomer in pretty much every way, regardless, and taking on a slightly more senior job now that someone else may have pushed 4 years ago is freaking me out a bit. Yep, tell me about it. Somebody said I'm 33 too, and I feel like I could have written this post by myself. This is interesting. This person says I was way too early of a quote unquote bloomer, and now I'm crashing out. I think being out of sync with your core developmental needs is the common link, whether late or early, to establish oneself in adult living. That's true. There may be complex trauma individuals who bloomed early, and that also caused them a lot of issues as well. They developed very early. I've heard women talk about that, not necessarily in a complex trauma context, but just in general, where they said they developed early, and grown men trying to talk to them when they're like 12 years old. Some of them even got into relationships with grown men when they were underage, and all types of crazy stuff was going on. Objectified or over sexualized when they were young, and maybe even teased by the boys. Maybe they were very, very tall and very, very developed. So that can come with its own set of things as well. I can't speak on that because I didn't grow up that way. I was a late bloomer, so that's why I don't talk about that because I really can't talk about something that don't know about. But I hold space for those people as well, because I could imagine what that's like. Um, because it also puts you in danger as a girl. Um, because boys growing up developing early can be problematic too, because there's women who prey on boys. But I think there's a sense of like, almost like I said, the shaming. You get shamed as a young girl for doing certain things that grown men are doing with you. It's very interesting. Um, because you wouldn't have, say like for example, a 13-year-old boy who's fully developed, right? He developed early, so he's, he has muscles and he's tall, he's big, and he has facial hair. Maybe some boys, they grow up fast, right? And now he's dealing with a woman who's my age, which is highly wrong, right? Because that's, first of all, it's illegal, but it's also very wrong for me to be dealing with a boy that's 13 or even 16 for that matter, because he's too young. But nobody's gonna really tell him, "Oh, you're being fast." Like if he speaks out and says, "Oh, I feel like I was kind of taken advantage of," nobody's going to say, "Oh, he's being fast." They're not gonna really say that for the most part. You will have some people that will say that he's a victim and he should have never been treated that way because he's underage, which is right. Unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't happen. People kind of praise him and say, "Oh, that's a good thing that he got access to an older woman, and oh, he got to, have that experience when he was young." But it's still wrong. It should not be glamorized because it's wrong. It's also illegal. It's also a crime. But I don't necessarily see people shaming him though, for that. So that's the part that I find kind of problematic. Like when girls are young and a grown man is dealing with her and it gets found out, she's called fast, which is really, really strange because she's actually, like I said, a minor and a grown man is dealing with her. So why is she called fast? That doesn't make any sense because that shouldn't even be happening anyway, you know? And sometimes they say, oh, well, some of these young girls look older. Yeah, that's true. Sometimes 16-year-old girls do look 18, but there are times when these grown men are dealing with girls who are 12. Okay, well, you mean to tell me a 12-year-old looks like she's 18? I doubt it. That's probably very rare that a 12-year-old looks 18. And even if she does look older, come on now. If you have enough conversations with her, you're going to tell that she's not 18. Even a 16-year-old, you could tell they're young. They're going to eventually start talking about school and friends and certain things. You're like, yeah, this is not an adult, right? So I think that it's very unfortunate for people who grow up very early because sometimes they actually become, I mean, it can happen to anybody because like I said, I was approached by a guy asking me if I wanted to make money. I wasn't developed. I didn't start to develop until I was like 16. I was 11 then. I didn't have any chest. I didn't have anything. So I didn't even have anything even at the age of 14. So clearly that doesn't, even if you're not developed, that doesn't mean that some guys still not going to approach you. So I'm not saying that only girls who develop early are targets. That's not what I'm saying. Because even younger kids are targeted and they're prepubescent. They're not even developed. So obviously that's not for everybody. I'm just saying that sometimes when girls are developed, it makes them even more of a target. They're already a target already as is, but it makes them even more of a target. And then some people justify it by saying, "Well, look, she's a grown woman. Look, she has a body. She has a menstrual." They kind of justify it because there's cultures that say that once a girl has a menstrual and she's developed, she's a woman, and that's actually illegal in those countries. So that's what I'm saying. Like any girl can be a target, even if she's not even developed. But I think that once she develops and this happens to her early in life, that can make her even more of a target. She can become very much sexualized, and then people justify it by saying, "Oh, well, look, she's developed, right? She's a woman, right? She can have a menstrual, she can get pregnant, right?" So they kind of try to justify that. Nobody can really justify it when it's like, I mean, they shouldn't be justifying it anyway. But I'm saying, like, for people who think that way, they really can't justify it when it's like a 12-year-old because it's like, I mean, 12-year-olds can have their period. But my point is, if she's not developed, if she doesn't have a period, they gotta be like, this girl, why would you even, you know what I mean? So either way, it's wrong. But I feel like some people they use that as an excuse to say, oh, she has a period, she can get pregnant, she's developed, she has a body like a grown woman. So what's the problem? But it's still wrong because she's not psychologically ready to have any type of relations with a grown man because she's not grown. Even if she has a body that's shaped like a woman, it's still wrong. It's just like it would be wrong for me to deal with a boy who is 12, 13, 14, or even 16 because his mind is not the same mind like I have because he's underage. That's why it's a crime in the United States because of that. Even if he has a quote unquote grown man body, it's still wrong. You mean to tell me I can't find a grown man who has the same body? So wait a minute. So he has a grown man body. He has facial hair and all this, whatever. I can't find a man my age or older who has the same type of body. who has a mindset of a man. I don't know. It's just, come on now. I can't justify that. It's wrong because, like I said, I can just go find me an actual man who is developed and he is actually mature and he's developed. Well, the hope is that he's mature, right? But my point is, like, it's that you can't excuse that. But unfortunately, with girls, they're shamed for that. They're blamed for that. So I'm gonna end here because we can go all day about this. I think I'm actually going to save this and we can go back to this another time and we can read more of it in another live. Um so it's almost 2 hours and 30 minutes. So I hope that this has been helpful to somebody. I know it's a very long live, but I'm going to keep it up because I think it can be very helpful to those who are struggling with complex trauma. And y'all can let me know in the comments if this is something that if you think it's been helpful. I'm going to talk about it. I was going to say, let me know if you want me to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it because I think that it's important. Oh, yeah. Before I go, I almost forgot about that. 1 second. Before I go, I want to share maybe 1 or 2 pages of people that I find very helpful when it comes to complex trauma. 1 second. Let me see. I'll share my screen in a second. I'm just trying to see if I can find. Okay. Okay, so let me 1 second. Okay, so I don't need y'all to see everybody I'm subscribed to. Not that I'm not subscribed to anybody bad, but some things are more from my personal. Let's see here. So, okay, so Tim Fletcher, and he has a program called Lift. I've never looked into it, but that's what it says at the top. And he talks a lot about complex trauma. I actually found him, I think it may have been a year ago or a little bit longer than that. And when I first found him, I was watching his videos about the characteristics of complex trauma. And I think he has it somewhere here. Let me see. Yeah, here we go. So as you can see, there's 60 videos here. And as you can see, I literally watched practically all of them because I went on a watching spree. I mean, there's some here that I didn't watch. But yeah, he has a lot of, and some of the videos were added, I think, to the playlist later on. But yeah, he has a lot of good videos. He talks about, like, and I like how recently he started talking about like anger, because I have like a holistic podcast that I haven't done in a while. I haven't done any episodes in a while, but I was like, one of the most popular episodes is when I talk about anger and depression, because a lot of times we don't talk about anger and we don't think that anger is a component of trauma and of depression and all that type of stuff, but it is, right? Depression can manifest itself in different ways and anger is one of them. So I like the fact that he was talking about anger, and not too long ago. Here we go. We have anger and complex trauma, because it is important. See, I watched 2 of those videos. It says why complex trauma creates so much anger, why you're angry with everyone and everything, because anger is something that I have struggled with. And he talks about this. He talks about a lot of stuff. He talks about like the maladaptive stuff, the scapegoat, the golden child. See, he talks about reparenting the inner child, journey of recovery, because he also does stuff for like recovery, people who are recovering, people who have addictions. but it's still helpful for people who may not have addictions to alcohol or any type of drugs, because complex trauma is kind of like a recovery as well, right? Healing from grief and complex trauma. um he also talks about like physiological things too, like the vagus nerve, the vagal nerve. He talks about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. So there's also things that you learn about as well about the physical body. He's also, I remember he had a video where he talked about like the eyes and stuff, and like the physical aspects of like complex trauma. Here we go. See, the 10 physical symptoms of complex trauma. 11 ways your complex trauma impacts your body and your brain. That's part 2. See how I watch both of them. Why you escape to a fantasy world, like, right? Limerence, all those type of things. Um, Characteristics of complex trauma: body image, uh, healing from burnout, suppressed anger, keys to letting go of the past, um, why shame affects 100% people with complex trauma. I mean, there's just so much stuff. We can go on and on for days, but Tim Fletcher is a good person uh, to listen to if you want to. And then let me share one more person, and then I'm gonna head out of here. One second, let me see. And some of you probably already saw some of the people I'm subscribed to anyway, because I'm not doing this live over. Um, I just don't want people to be distracted by that. Oh, that's who she subscribed to. Yeah, I'm subscribed to all different types of people. Let me see. Where is the other page? I don't see it here. Am I not subscribed to her? I wonder if I never subscribed to her. I thought I did. One second, let me check something. Uh Yeah, I am subscribed to her. I don't know why it wasn't coming up. Maybe I was just searching it wrong. Oh yeah, there she goes. Okay. I didn't remember like the full name. One second, let me just reshare again. Let me go back. Let's see. Okay, here we go. So crappy childhood fairy. So I don't watch her as often as I watch Tim Fletcher, but I do watch some of her stuff as well. And she talks about complex trauma as well, childhood PTSD. Um, so I like a lot of her videos as well. And one thing I like that she does is that she'll read like obviously anonymously, but she'll read like people's letters and stuff talking about like, oh, I'm dating this guy and this is happening, or I have this experience, that experience, and she'll read it and then she'll make notes and then she'll respond to it. Um, so she has a lot of good videos as well. Um, Yeah, and sometimes she'll call you out. I mean, Tim Fletcher does the same thing too, but she'll call you out. Sometimes she'll say like, this is why your friendships are not that great because you're pushing them away in these type of ways, and it's not to, and she doesn't do it in a way like, oh, it's all your fault. You're a horrible person. You're a horrible friend. It's kind of to say because you have CPTSD, these are the things that you do, and sometimes these are why you can't keep friendships, or these are why you keep ending up in these type of situations with men. It's not because you're a bad, horrible, evil person. It's because you have these issues, and maybe you were wrong. Maybe you kind of pushed these people away, right? It doesn't mean that they were innocent, but it's just that so you can kind of take autonomy and responsibility for yourself and what you can change. And the only person you can change is yourself, right? Half the time we can't even do that, right? Sometimes we really need um support, right? But yeah, I like her as well. So she has a lot of videos, as you can see. So that's basically that. So I just wanted to share those two people. Obviously, there's other people that I like as well. There's also some pages that I like that talk about attachment styles. Uh, Let me share one more thing. I don't think I'm subscribed to these people. Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry. How do you get to? Okay, let me see if I can just type it in. Is she still posting videos? Let me see. Oh, she is. Okay. I'm not subscribed to her, but I found her a while ago. I might end up subscribing. It takes me time to subscribe to people. I have to like watch like 1,000 videos. Like, nah, I'm obviously I'm exaggerating, but I do like watch like a good like 20 videos or so to kind of get an idea of kind of the person's mindset and what they really believe in, and then I'll subscribe. I rarely ever subscribe right away because I like to be loyal and invested in people. Like if I'm subscribed to like people have to subscribe to, I can't remember the last time I was subscribed from somebody. It's been a while. So when I'm subscribed to you, I'm usually subscribed to you for like 10 years or so, like even longer. Like I said, sometimes I never even actually unsubscribe because I tend to be pretty loyal to the people that I like as far as people I watch online. So that's why I take my time. That's like a lesson of itself, right? Let's take our time in relationships too, right? Um, One second, let me see something. Okay, so this page here, Thais Gibson, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but I found her video a long time ago about fearful avoidant, which is my attachment style. I talked about that at the beginning or earlier on in the was it? I think it was her, right? Uh which one was the video that I watched? I don't remember. Anyways, it was something. It was some video that I watched, and then they have like a quiz that you take because I didn't actually really know what my attachment style was, and then I went to the website. Okay, let me see if is it showing the right website? No, wait, let me 1 second. Yeah, I went here and then I took the attachment quiz. And then that's where I ended up getting the fearful avoidant. Let me see if I can find it. How am I able to show this without mm, hmm. Let me just make sure that there's nothing personal that's showing up on here. Okay. So this is what it says your primary attachment style is fearful avoidant. A fearful avoidant attachment style often feels that relationships are really challenging. The fearful avoidant has polar opposite fears as a subconscious level, the fear of abandonment and also the fear of being too close. More than anything, fearful avoidants can struggle to fully trust and open up about their flaws in a relationship because they have been burned in the past and want to appear as perfect. This is just one of the many challenging patterns that come with being afraid to avoid attachment styles. Okay, so it's basically saying that you can change that, and these are the ways you can work on it, and then you can sign, because I know she has some stuff on her website where you can sign up for some resources. I've never done it before, but I have considered it. But I'm gonna stop here. 2 hours and a half is long enough, and I hope that this live has been helpful. And like I said, I already shared Tim Fletcher and Crappy Childhood Fairy, and this last page, which I'm not subscribed to, but I might subscribe, the Personal Development School, because I think learning about your attachment style can be so helpful, especially if you have complex trauma. So I think it's very, very helpful. So for those of you who are late bloomers and you have complex trauma, you're not alone. I'm in it with you, and there's a lot of others who understand what it's like to be a late bloomer and to have complex trauma. So yeah, and make sure you use Reddit. When we read the Reddit thread, like make sure you use Reddit to read about so many other people's experiences, so that you don't feel alone and you understand that this is a common thing among people who have struggled with complex trauma. So it's not something that only you are going through. So I'm glad that I read it. It's not the first time that I read people's experience about complex trauma, but I think it just was nice to do it on live because I kind of got a few different perspectives. Like, that's interesting, especially hearing it from people who are older. It gives you some sense of peace to know, okay, even in your 50s, you could still sometimes feel a little behind. And of course, logically, I know that, I'm a thinker, so I'm always thinking about what is it like to be this age? What is it like to be like this? What is it like to be like that? I'm always questioning those things. But it's different to actually hear it from somebody who's actually in that space and they speak about their experience rather than just, thinking about it. So yeah. So take care, y'all, and I hope y'all have a good weekend. If I'm not back, but I'm gonna try my best to be a little more consistent with videos and live streams. And hopefully over time, if I do more and more live streams, people will actually come through and connect with me. Probably what I may have to do is start to schedule them ahead of time so that people know what time I'm going live so that they can join and I can interact with y'all in the chat room, maybe even bring people up to speak, as long as people are respectful and so forth. So we'll see. So take care, y'all. And like I said, have a good weekend. If I don't talk to you again soon, this weekend. And yeah, I'm going to go now. Take care. Bye.